Xiulai kicked the bucket on his old life. At 28, the redhead walked away from a golden career at a major corporation. The news spread fast through the company. The most promising leader was out. While the team struggled to understand such a drastic decision, he only wanted one thing: to breathe outside the office. The farewell took place at an upscale restaurant. Between wine toasts and stunned looks, no one could accept that he was really leaving everything behind. Director W, who saw him as a future successor, tried to hold him back, but the decision was final. Xiulai no longer wanted to be a corporate slave. He was chasing peace. When asked about his next move, he revealed the plan: open a cafe, adopt a few pets, and escape the pressure. His co-workers, trapped in their own bills and frustrations, felt a hint of envy, but still celebrated their friend's new path. He promised discounts for the old crew, and the party atmosphere sealed the end of an era. Time passed, and the dream became reality. Lee's cafe turned into the hottest spot in town, packed with celebrities and curious customers. Behind the counter, life moved at a different pace. He felt alive serving people and watching the business thrive. Beaming with success, he rushed to share the news and brag a little to his girlfriend, who was also named Lee. Guy Fen listened with excitement in her eyes. The cafe's net profit had already surpassed 100,000 yuan in the past month, and projections showed the entire initial investment could be paid off within just 1 year. Proud, she showered her boyfriend with praise. Xiulai finally felt that the risky gamble, where he burned through all his savings and even mortgaged his own house to invest over $1 million, had been worth it. But the victory didn't last long. The heavy roar of engines shattered the peace. Demolition tractors pulled up right in front of the hero's cafe. The shock was immediate. Without understanding what was happening, Xiulai watched workers prepare to tear everything down. One of them, completely indifferent, dropped the bombshell. The land had been sold, and every building in the area was scheduled for demolition. Panic took over. No one had warned him. No notice, no message, nothing. When he demanded answers, the workers simply told him to take it up with the property owner, since they were only there to follow orders. Xiulai pulled out his phone, frantically trying to reach the landlord while demanding the machines stop. The workers' response was pure mockery. They laughed in his face, making fun of the fact that he had rented a doomed property and invested a fortune into land that was about to turn into dust. The owner washed his hands of the situation with cold cynicism. He claimed he had already mentioned the future demolition and that Xiulai should just find another location for the cafe. The problem was that the young man had poured a massive amount of money into renovations and marketing for that specific building. The financial loss was enormous, and the demolition seemed inevitable. Consumed by anger, Xiulai refused to back down. He stood his ground, shouting that the lack of proper notice was a blatant breach of contract and demanding immediate compensation for the damages. The workers watched the scene with disdain, treating the young man's desperation like rookie ignorance from someone who didn't understand the dirty rules of the game. Xiulai realized the trap. The landlord had deliberately hidden the truth to keep collecting rent until the very last second. When confronted, the man, a fat, arrogant figure, let out a mocking laugh. With complete indifference, he dared Xiulai to sue him, knowing the legal system would move slower than the excavators outside. The landlord was a complete scumbag. He shoved full responsibility for the building onto Xiulai in the contract, acting as if the young man should quietly accept the loss. The crook's argument was absurd. He claimed he didn't know the exact demolition date when the contract was signed, and that, since the cafe had made money for a while, Xiulai had already come out ahead. With a smug grin, he offered only 10,000 yen as a pitiful compensation. While the lowlife humiliated the protagonist over the phone, his spoiled daughter could be heard in the background, demanding a luxury trip to Antarctica that cost 170,000 yen per person. The contrast was disgusting. Realizing the conversation was turning ugly, the man brushed him off and hung up, saying he had other commitments. The redhead tried everything to stop the machines, arguing that it was a clear crime and contractual fraud. He searched for any sign of cooperation or common sense, but it was useless. The workers, completely indifferent and focused only on finishing the job, fired up the engines, ignoring the desperation of the man watching his life collapse. The machines didn't stop. Buildings fell one after another, while Xiulai's world crumbled along with them. Despair took over. Every cent he had ever earned was buried in that rubble. With his blood boiling, the redhead refused to accept the loss in silence. He felt that saving what remained was his responsibility alone, and he began to craft a desperate plan to fight back against that injustice. Hours later, back at home, the silence in the living room felt heavy. He tried the diplomatic route, sending messages to the landlord demanding the return of at least 3 years of rent to reduce the financial damage. The response was nothing but silence. The scammer simply blocked his contact, disappearing with both the money and the dignity of the business. That was when Gai Fen showed up. She walked into the room without the slightest idea that the cafe had already turned to dust. Her presence was the only comfort in the middle of the chaos, making him lower his guard for a moment. Looking at her, he regained a bit of strength. Giving up wasn't an option while he still had her support. Gathering his courage, he finally told her everything about the total destruction. Shocked, she immediately asked what his next move would be to climb out of the hole. Xiulai tried to stay confident, assuring her they would find a way to start over from scratch. The plan sounded solid. Selling the furniture and equipment could bring in around 200,000 yuan, and the rest would come once the landlord returned the money. He even imagined using his reputation to attract former customers to a new location, but his optimism didn't convince Gai Fen. The mood shifted when she mentioned someone named Zhao Lidi. Xiulai frowned, assuming the man had been bothering his girlfriend again, but the truth was worse. With a cold expression, she dropped the bombshell. She wanted to end the relationship. The young man froze in shock. Being abandoned at the worst moment of his life made no sense. He grabbed her hand, begging for time and promising that, just like he had bounced back in his career before, he would do the same with the cafe. Gai Fen had no interest in promises. She was blunt. Zhao Lid had already secured her future even before the breakup. She showed off an expensive luxury handbag, a gift from her new suitor, making it clear that she preferred the immediate comfort of a wealthy man over the uncertainty of her ex-boyfriend. Xiulai felt the blow deeply. While he had been fighting for his business, she had been accepting gifts from another man behind his back, trading their relationship for someone with deeper pockets. Gai Fen looked at Xiulai and presented a surreal proposal. She admitted that the new suitor was old and probably wouldn't live much longer, but assured him her plan was to inherit his fortune and, after he passed away, run back into her ex's arms. With shocking cynicism, she revealed that the rich man had offered 1 million yuan for her to stay with him, a fortune that could solve all of Xiulai's problems and even save the cafe. His response was sharp and final. Even if he ended up living on the streets and starving, he would never accept being supported by a scheme like that. Disgust and fury took over the young man. He didn't want to look at her face anymore and ordered her to get out of his house immediately. Gai Fen showed no regret. On her way out, she threw one last insult, saying she had no intention of staying with someone so broke that he couldn't even keep a roof over his own head. Alone and at rock bottom, Xiulai watched night fall under a heavy storm. With no direction, he walked through the rain, completely soaked, feeling the crushing weight of depression. While the world around him seemed to move on and other people paid off their debts, he could only think about the few belongings he still had left to sell. The worst was yet to come. In the middle of that darkness, a group of intimidating men surrounded him, cutting off his path. The pressure tightened. The debt collectors showed no mercy and demanded immediate payment, threatening to destroy Xiulai's reputation if he failed to settle the debt. Memories of humiliation and loss pounded inside his head as he wandered aimlessly, trying to find a way out of the disaster his life had become. In the middle of his despair, he ended up at the ruins of what used to be the Hero's Cafe. The place where he had poured all his dreams was now nothing more than a fenced-off dump. There, at the lowest point of his journey, he begged the heavens for relief, swearing that if he ever managed to rise again, he would prove his worth to the entire world. But fate was cruel. While wandering through the construction site, a fatal accident cut everything short. Xiulai was struck by a crane and died instantly at the age of 28. At first, his consciousness didn't even realize the end. He floated like a spirit above his own body, feeling a strange lightness as the police sealed off the area. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. To the doctors, it was just another routine death, but the workers were left in shock by the tragedy. Even in that ghost-like state, Lee's final thought was a silent protest against the injustice of the world. He still believed that good people should receive good things, despite ending up that way. The destroyed cafe, which should have been the grave of his hopes, became the stage for something supernatural. In the middle of the rubble, a blinding light appeared out of nowhere, making Xiulai question his own sanity. Moments later, floating windows filled with mysterious text began popping up before his eyes, as if the universe itself were processing the data of his existence. It was a whirlwind of memories. He saw everything, from the birth of stars and black holes to the moments when he was praised by everyone at the peak of his career. The images became clearer and more intense until the ground vanished beneath him. The young man fell into an endless abyss, diving into total darkness until everything faded away. When he opened his eyes, the scene had changed completely. The chaos of the construction site and the coldness of death were replaced by a noisy classroom. He was sitting at a school desk, confused, until a familiar voice interrupted him. It was John Min, his old friend, asking if he had hit his head. Still in shock, Shulai asked if he was dead. John Min laughed, saying he was talking nonsense and that nothing serious had happened. The hero jumped to his feet, feeling the desk and looking around. It felt like everything had been just a nightmare, or that he had somehow just arrived in paradise. Shulai had always believed that his collection of good deeds would open the gates of heaven. So when he saw Professor W walking toward him, he became certain he was in heaven. The teacher was the person he respected most in the world. In the past, when poverty nearly destroyed his future, it was this man who secured his education with recommendation letters. Seeing his mentor alive was shocking, since the professor had died tragically after an unjust conflict that Shulai had witnessed firsthand. Overcome with emotion, the young man ran to hug his mentor. Through tears, he thanked him and wished that the professor would have an eternal life filled with wealth and peace in that new realm. But the reception was far from angelic. Instead of wings, the master used a rolled-up paper to smack the student hard on the head. Shouting, the man demanded that Shulai stop burying him before his time and suggested that the boy was suffering from a heavy hangover from the night before. John Min quickly stepped in, trying to calm the professor and pull his friend back to reality. He was worried. If Shulai kept acting like that, he would fail the class without mercy. He insisted that this wasn't a dream or a hallucination, but a real lecture that required focus. Even while feeling the sting of the hit and hearing the classroom chatter, Shulai's mind kept spinning. He couldn't figure out how he had returned to that exact moment in his youth. Shulai scanned the room, trying to process the scene. His friend urged him to wash his face after class and stop staying up all night, but the redhead was outraged. To him, it made no sense to face college subjects and responsibilities even after death. If this was heaven, why did he still have to study? While the teacher ignored the outburst and continued the lesson, Shulai's gaze locked onto Xiaonin. In his past life, he had lost contact with her and never understood why she had left so early. The girl, far from shy, returned the stare with intensity. The atmosphere grew awkward, and John Min, noticing the tension, joked that this was the protagonist's strategy to get her attention. Embarrassed, Xiaonin quickly looked away and muttered that she wouldn't waste time staring at him, even though the blush on her cheeks gave away her discomfort. The movement caught the teacher's attention, who didn't appreciate seeing one of his best students breaking the silence rule. Shulai noticed that the professor still carried the same strict posture as always. When he lowered his eyes to the desk, he saw a book about financial markets and investments. That was the final trigger. The place was identical to his old reality. A chill ran down his spine, confirming the suspicion. This wasn't a hallucination or heaven. Just like in the fiction stories he used to read, he had been reborn. At the exact moment of that realization, the bell rang, announcing the break. Shulai was still in shock, processing the new reality, while John Min kept asking what had happened. To his friend, seeing the redhead sleeping in class and acting like a lunatic was bizarre, since he had always been the most focused student. Worried, John Min quickly assumed the problem was money and offered to help. Even though Shulai refused and said he was fine, his friend insisted. He pulled 100 yen from his pocket and handed it to the protagonist, calling it an investment in the future. In a joking tone, but with real sincerity underneath, John Min said that the family business of Shulai would take off someday, and that if he himself ever became a failure and got kicked out of his house, he hoped he would have a safe place to stay with his buddy. Shulai accepted the money but made one thing clear. It wasn't a gift. He promised that his friend could ask for the money back any time. Excited about the deal, Janmin immediately started planning a barbecue to celebrate. Night fell, and the scene shifted to the college dormitory. Lying in bed, the redhead finally connected the dots. He had truly traveled back in time. It was 1998. He had been given a second chance at the peak of his college youth. The death under the crane, the darkness, and the despair of the destroyed cafe now felt like a distant nightmare. Shulai realized he held the power to rewrite his own story, using knowledge from the future to avoid making the same mistakes again. Shulai was back in 1998, but fragments of the future still scrambled his mind. He saw memories of advanced technologies that made no sense for that era, yet he chose to ignore the mystery. His focus now was different. This was the golden chance to build the empire he had always dreamed of and avoid ending up in the gutter again. While trying to fall asleep, John Min grumbled from the other side of the room. confused about why his friend was still restless. Xu Lai simply agreed and pretended to sleep, but his mind was running at full speed. To his friend, he looked like a lunatic who owed millions in the morning and acted like a fool at night. What nobody knew was that the hero was drafting a full-scale war plan. This time, the story would be different. He would protect the people he loved and make sure no one died. On top of that, his revenge list was ready. Everyone who had harmed him in his past life would pay a heavy price. Using the knowledge of someone who had already seen tomorrow, he was determined to become the richest man on the planet. The next morning, sitting in class, his focus was absolute. Xu Lai began mapping out China's economy, knowing that future reforms would trigger a massive market boom. He knew that after 2003, real estate prices would skyrocket. The only obstacle right now was obvious. In 1998, he was still a broke student with no money to start investing. The lack of cash was the biggest barrier. Without startup capital, Xu Lai knew it would be impossible to dive into the markets that were about to explode: stocks, technology, and retail. He was broke, but he had an advantage no one else possessed: a clear vision of what would happen between 1998 and 2003. He needed money, and he needed it fast. John Min still found his friend's behavior strange. When he peeked at Xu Lai's notebooks, he saw detailed notes about finance and computer science, like someone preparing to switch careers overnight. The young man tried to reassure him, reminding him that with his high grades, the worst-case scenario would be landing a job at a bank, a future that, in John Min's eyes, was secure and promising. Ironically, Xu Lai remembered that in his past life, the bank had been the first place to shut its doors on him. But he wasn't focused on traditional jobs anymore. The plan now involved his family's business. His parents were about to give up everything and return to the countryside to survive through farming. He knew they had talent and persistence. They just needed the right push to keep from abandoning the city. John Min, always helpful, offered valuable support. He said he would ask his own father to evaluate the potential of Xu Lai's family business. The friend wanted to use his influence to make sure the protagonist wouldn't fall into hardship and that his plans for prosperity would finally become reality. Xu Lai accepted the help immediately, but the situation wasn't so simple. John Min's father was focused on a new restaurant in the city center that, despite all the effort, wasn't gaining traction. Hearing about the business triggered a dark memory from Xu Lai's past life. Uncle Zhang had once been a successful entrepreneur, but bad luck and the wrong crowd eventually drove him into total ruin. In the original timeline, John Min went bankrupt and disappeared without a trace. Xu Lai could still picture his friend crying, fleeing the city with nowhere to go. In 1998, he refused to let that happen again. Trying to warn his partner, he suggested keeping a close eye on the restaurant's cash flow to prevent a financial disaster. John Min just laughed, thinking his friend was acting like a grumpy old man. To him, his father was a master businessman, and there was no reason to panic. But Xu Lai knew the business was heading straight for the abyss. He wrote everything down in his notebook. He needed proof that the current path was a mistake in order to save his friend's family's future. Despite his youthful arrogance, John Min was a man of gold. He always bought extra food to share with Xu Lai, knowing his financial situation was rough. He even offered money, joking that he would charge high interest later just to protect his friend's pride. Faced with such loyalty, the hero decided that the first major step in his new life would be to repay that friendship by saving Uncle Zhang's empire from total destruction. Back at the dorm, the mood was all about strategy. While taking a shower, Xu Lai reflected on the limitations of his past life. His lack of formal education had always slowed his rise to the top. This time, he wouldn't repeat that mistake. The plan was clear: move into technology. In his previous life, he had become a master programmer through sheer grit, and now that knowledge was his secret weapon. The countdown to success had already begun. In 1999, the legendary Fion company would be founded in Ansa, and Xu Lai knew that was his gateway. If he could partner with John Fion early on, the game would be won. Yet the obstacle remained the same. He needed money to start investing and position himself as a serious player in the Chinese market that was about to explode. The redhead's goal was incredibly ambitious. He didn't just want to get rich. He wanted to shape the country's economic future and make the entire world feel the impact of his influence. But the seriousness of the moment was interrupted in a ridiculous way. While reaching for the bar of soap that had slipped to the floor, a sudden feeling of being watched ran down his spine. When he turned around, he came face to face with John Min. Holding back laughter, his friend cracked a joke about the classic dropped soap situation in a shared shower. The awkward moment shattered the epic mood of those reflections, leaving Xu Lai suspicious about his partner's clueless sense of humor. Despite the scare, it was just another one of John Min's questionable jokes. Xiu Lai tried to ignore it and got dressed, but something caught his attention. A strange glow began radiating around his friend. The steam in the bathroom suddenly took on a golden hue, identical to the mysterious light he had seen moments before dying at the cafe. Intrigued, Xiu Lai asked whether his friend could also see that magical phenomenon. John Min, however, noticed absolutely nothing and began to think the redhead was truly losing his mind. He suggested that the hero see a doctor and get a prescription, since the hallucinations and bizarre behavior were getting out of control. As quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, leaving the young man even more confused about what it meant. In the university cafeteria, the topic of conversation was obvious. Xiaonin and her friends were discussing Xiu Lai's recent behavior. Pretending total indifference, the girl complained that he showed up and disappeared whenever he felt like it, insisting she didn't care at all about that jerk. Her friends just laughed, knowing she couldn't hide her interest. Deep down, Xiaonin found everything extremely strange. In the past, or rather until recently, Xiu Lai had been her shadow. He chose the same classes, attended the same extra courses, and always found a strategic seat in the library just to be noticed by her. His sudden change in behavior, now focused on something much bigger, left the girl completely intrigued. Back then, Xiu Lai never missed a class just to stay close to her, but now he buried himself in the back of the room, devouring technical books and laughing to himself. Xiaonin's friends teased her, saying her lovesick puppy had turned into a hardcore nerd aiming for graduate school. The redhead, however, had only one person on his mind, Jan Fion. He knew the future tech giant would face critical problems at its launch, and he planned to be there to fix them. Lost in his plans, he walked past the girls without even lifting his eyes from the book. The collision was inevitable. He bumped into Xiaonin so hard that her lunch fell straight to the floor. Already irritated from being ignored all day, the girl exploded. Her friends started shouting, accusing him of being blind or doing it on purpose just to get attention. Furious, Xiaonin snapped that he should stop following her and causing trouble, once again making it clear she had zero interest in him. Xiu Lai, maintaining complete calm and showing no emotion, simply bent down to pick up the mess. With a coldness she had never seen before, he apologized for the distraction and reached for his wallet. He offered money to pay for a new meal, treating the incident like a routine transaction. The detached attitude caught Xiaonin off guard. Feeling a mix of embarrassment and confusion, she refused the money and, in a much softer tone, simply asked him to be more careful while walking. Unable to understand why that former puppy now acted as if she were a complete stranger. The irony of Xiaonin's warning didn't go unnoticed. She said that if he kept walking around distracted, he might get run over. Xiu Lai just nodded, but within seconds he was already buried in his book again, focused on the technical problems at Fion's company that would soon make headlines. His cold reaction left Xiaonin's friends stunned. They commented that in the past he would have begged for forgiveness and rushed to buy her a feast, but now he handled everything with money and indifference. Xiaonin tried to maintain her act of disinterest, but the shift in his behavior was driving her crazy. She felt that his coldness was a wall she couldn't break. Restless, she finally walked over to the table where the redhead was eating and studying. Calling him by name, she claimed they needed to clear up a misunderstanding. Xiu Lai didn't even lift his head. He simply replied that there was nothing to discuss, since the issue of the spilled lunch had already been settled with payment. The blunt response made the girl blush with embarrassment and anger. Not knowing how to deal with that wall of ice, she gave up on the conversation and told him to keep eating before storming off. It was obvious to everyone that he used to be crazy about her, but now the tables had turned. While Xiu Lai wrote strategic notes in his notebook, acting as if she were invisible, Xiaonin boiled with indignation, feeling humiliated by the indifference of the man who once lived at her feet. Xiaonin burned with rage. She had been sitting right in front of him for 3 minutes, and the redhead hadn't taken his eyes off the pages once. She expected him to give in and beg for attention, but Xiu Lai was in another world. In truth, he felt a deep sense of disgust. When he glanced to the side, he spotted the real source of his hatred, Zan Sueli. Sueli was the definition of privilege and arrogance. Rich, influential, and always surrounded by followers, she watched the scene with a satisfied smile, assuming Xiu Lai was simply switching targets. With an air of superiority, she declared that behind that act he was a terrible person and would never stand a chance with her. Xiu Lai didn't bother arguing. He simply said she was completely mistaken and stood up. He walked away without saying a word to Xiaonin, leaving the girl in shock. She couldn't believe he had the nerve to ignore her like that. But the hero's mind was burning because of Sueli. In his past life, she had been the one who destroyed Professor W. Using her family's power and bribing the media, she fabricated a lie that cornered the teacher. The scandal was so severe that not even the professor's wife and son escaped public humiliation. The man, who had always been an example of loyalty and dedication to his students, saw his reputation crushed. With no strength left to fight the corrupt system and unable to clear his name, the professor fell into absolute despair, knowing he would never teach again. Xu Lai clenched his fists. This time, he would not allow his mentor to be destroyed. The crowd watched the spectacle of horror, waiting for the tragic outcome. In the middle of the chaos, the young Xu Lai desperately tried to calm the professor, but the mentor had already accepted his fate. He maintained his dignity until the final second, regretting only the burden his wife and son would have to carry. By the time Xu Lai finally reached the scene, it was too late. Professor W could not be saved. The trail of destruction didn't stop there. The professor's wife couldn't endure the pain and also passed away, leaving their 10-year-old son alone and traumatized. Meanwhile, the true architects of the disaster, Zan Sueli's parents, behaved as if nothing had happened. Sueli herself, surrounded by shallow friends, mocked the dead teacher. They laughed, saying he was already old and that his burial plot should have been purchased before prices went up. Sueli's cynicism was revolting. She bragged that her father would always protect her and that the professor's death was nobody's fault. Xu Lai's hatred boiled over. In his mind, true justice would be trading that spoiled girl's life for the survival of the innocent couple. In the middle of that storm of memories, Xiaonin touched his hand, pulling him back to reality. She was confused by the firm grip and icy gaze of the young man, not realizing that what burned inside him was not compassion, but an unrelenting desire for revenge. Xu Lai could think of only one thing. He would make Sueli kneel and pay for every drop of blood that had been spilled. The girl, noticing that the former puppy no longer reacted to her drama, began to feel uneasy. With a cutting voice, the hero declared that he knew exactly what she thought of him and that the days when he crawled at her feet were over for good. Xiaonin felt the blow. Seeing the man who once chased her now paying attention to other girls stirred a jealousy she tried to hide behind weak excuses. Xu Lai, with no patience for games, cut straight to the point and threw out a challenge. He wanted to know whether she truly understood what really drives the financial market. With a confident tone, she tried to give a theoretical answer, naming knowledge and perseverance as the pillars of success. The redhead simply shook his head. He explained that she was wrong. The true soul of everything is liquidity. Without it, the market freezes and dies. He delivered a quick lesson on how the masters of finance survive only by optimizing risk and managing capital, a principle that applies to everything from stocks to derivatives. The girl fell silent, realizing that this wasn't just empty student talk. Before turning away, Xu Lai delivered the final sting. He warned that if she stayed trapped in theory alone, she would become a limited person with no real vision. He wished her good luck in a mocking tone that left her completely disoriented. Xiaonin tried to call him back to continue the discussion, but he had already disappeared into the crowd, eager to put his plans into action. She remained there, processing the humiliation of being dismissed. Meanwhile, the hero reflected on how blind he had been in his past life for failing to notice her superficial nature. He remembered a friend who once said he was the perfect catch, honest and handsome, but Xiaonin had rejected him arrogantly, claiming she didn't associate with people of lower status. Now, he was the one who no longer saw anything special in her. The hero felt nothing anymore for the conceited girl who tried to hook him with ego games. Coldness had become his new shield. Looking back, he realized how naive and young he had been in his previous life. He had been fascinated by her, wasting time and energy while being treated like trash. Now the truth had finally sunk in. He could appreciate beauty, but he would never be anyone's doormat again. His full focus now was leveling up. Xu Lai made a silent pact with himself. No more acting like a fool. The goal was total success in business, especially by taking advantage of Yan Feilong's rise. He understood that in the real world, beauty or initial status means nothing when you have power. The raw force of money and influence can hide any flaw. The young man decided to bury fleeting romances and invest every drop of sweat into building wealth and authority. Although jumping back to 1998 felt like a hallucination, he was loving this dream. He was in the perfect position to change destiny. Back at the dorm, reality knocked on the door in the form of Zhang Min. Excited, his friend invited him to come over to his house to watch the World Cup final between Brazil and France, since they would have the place all to themselves. With knowledge of the future, Xu Lai already knew the outcome. Brazil would be defeated. He turned down the invitation coldly, using the excuse that he needed to finish his studies. Watching a game whose ending he already knew held no excitement. His focus was on something much bigger, like infiltrating the giant Pheon. His friend was left in shock, unable to understand how his soccer buddy had become someone so obsessed and distant. Janmin tried everything to convince his pal, insisting that a World Cup final was sacred and only happened once every 4 years. He even joked that Xu Lai was getting too wrapped up in studying just to impress Xiaonin with his intelligence, but the hero didn't care. The young man's cold attitude made his friend so uncomfortable that he decided to raise the stakes with a heavy bet. The loser would have to wash all the dirty socks and underwear that had been rotting under the mattress. Xu Lai agreed immediately, already smelling the unbearable stench coming from the corner of the room, but with absolute confidence in his victory. John Min, trusting the favorite, put all his chips on Brazil. With a sly smile, the redhead was precise. He bet on a 3-0 win for France, and even predicted that Brazil wouldn't see the ball at all. John Min found the bet absurdly specific and started celebrating ahead of time, telling Xu Lai to get the soap ready. He commented on how betting houses were booming and complained that getting rich overnight wasn't so easy in their country, dreaming about the life of a millionaire overseas. What he didn't know was that Xu Lai had the treasure map. The hero remembered that beyond soccer, the real turning point would come in 2001 with the launch of the Universal Lottery in China. That was the true chance to build the capital he desperately needed. The result of that night was already written, and Xu Lai only waited for the final whistle to watch his friend face the mountain of dirty clothes while he planned his next step toward fortune. At dawn, the scale of his plans felt enormous, but Xu Lai could sense the weight of the butterfly effect. He knew that one wrong move could ruin everything. He needed surgical precision. Reflecting on the past, he remembered how bad luck had always followed him and that, although gambling was a fast path, the risk was brutal. Reality rarely forgives those who dream too high without protection. With a dark tone, he tapped John Min on the shoulder and gave his friend a harsh reality check, since the young man still saw the world through colorful lenses. Xu Lai explained that sudden success attracts dangerous attention. For every lucky person who gets rich overnight, there are thousands who lose everything, or worse. He warned that if a poor student started making money in a consistent and suspicious way, envy and hatred would be inevitable. The prediction was chilling. Today's lucky man could easily end up in a body bag at the bottom of a lake tomorrow. The hero made it clear that no one is immune to having their throat cut because of someone else's greed. John Min began to tremble, shocked by the coldness and deep knowledge his friend showed about the dark side of money. He had never seen that side of Xu Lai before. Realizing he had made things too heavy, the redhead changed his tone to ease the tension. He patted his friend on the shoulder and told him to relax and focus on positive energy. Nearly in tears from nervousness, Jean Min swore he would be an honest and fair man, but soon laughed again, impressed. He joked that his buddy must have spent time with some extremely rich big shot to have become so sharp about how the world really works. Life took an unexpected turn for the protagonist. After being dumped by his girlfriend, he decided it was time to turn the tables and focus on his own growth. His reasoning was practical. Love demands time he didn't have. To Lee, accumulating possessions was an illusion, because money comes and goes, but character and personal development are the only things that truly remain. Those convictions hit hard within his social circle. Jiang Min couldn't accept that his friend had become so unyielding. Trying to lighten the mood, Jiang showed up with what seemed like the perfect invitation: soccer, beer, and snacks. It was an offer anyone would accept without thinking twice, yet the answer was a blunt no. The refusal set off alarms. Jiang began to theorize that his friend's isolation hid something worse, maybe a serious financial crisis or problems at home that pride wouldn't allow him to reveal. He imagined Lee was working himself to exhaustion in some night job just to avoid begging anyone for help. Before leaving, Jiang made one thing clear: if things ever got tough, he just had to speak up. There was no need for ceremony or shame between them. Alone, the redhead felt the weight of that loyalty. Looking back on the past, he realized how much those guys mattered, and how different his fate might have been if they had been around earlier. That gesture from Zhang became an emotional turning point. Even with the protagonist focused on his solitary journey, it was clear he now had a real ally for the battles ahead. The truce didn't last long, because the events that followed would give no one a moment of rest. The protagonist's ingenuity shined inside the computer lab. With total command over the machines, he established the connection effortlessly and ran the most advanced software of that era. All the effort paid off when he saw the program he had written working flawlessly. That disc in his hands was his ticket to the top. While he advanced in technology, chaos spread through the hallways. An opportunistic student pretended to be hardworking, begging Professor Lin for help with homework just to hide his true intentions. But the real poison was Sueli. The girl, who contributed nothing of value to the world, acted with disgusting arrogance. The scene in the corridor was bizarre. The professor was visibly uncomfortable, his face marked with lipstick, while Sueli blackmailed him into keeping quiet about her adventures. Lee watched from a distance, recognizing the girl's predatory pattern. No one suspected the dirty tactics she used to get what she wanted, hidden behind a facade of wealth and beauty. Rumors spread wildly among the university students. The focus was Professor W. Many doubted he was capable of any wrongdoing, wondering if everything wasn't just another setup by Sueli. To the public, she was as perfect as a flower. But behind the scenes, the mystery kept growing. While the blonde tried to explain that her family's influence went far beyond money, the pink-haired girl beside her could barely process the seriousness of those revelations. The gossip was heavy. Sueli lived off the radar, disappearing from the dorm without a trace, and not even the school administration knew where she lived. The secret was guarded fiercely, but the list of victims kept growing. Professor W suffered the most. Going against the girl was like signing a social death sentence. Anyone who resisted her charm ended up buried under threats. The fear was real, to the point that a student named Hangen was forced to drop out just to escape her harassment. To cold observers, the blame fell on those who got caught in the trap. The relationship between teacher and student had become a minefield, where some tried to protect students like their own children, while others were manipulated through their weaknesses. No one had the courage to expose the villain, fearing they would be the next target of scandal. The group's blonde girl knew very well that Sueli's history of destruction left no room for heroes. The shock came when Professor W, who had been hiding nearby, heard every word. The atmosphere grew tense, and the girls tried to escape that dangerous conversation. But the protagonist acted quickly. He grabbed one of them by the arm, demanding to know the full truth that Lee had failed to uncover. Cornered and in tears, the blonde tried to dodge the question, swearing it was all just hallway gossip. As he connected the dots with the present, the realization finally hit him. Sueli's kiss on the teacher wasn't affection, it was a trap. Behind her angelic face and stunning beauty hid a serpent skilled in manipulation. Her game was silent and deadly, but now the secret was out in the open. The protagonist had all the leverage needed to expose Sueli, yet he chose not to waste ammunition on someone unworthy. His focus was elsewhere, Jan Fion. Instead of confronting her directly, he decided fate itself would eventually collect the debt from the villain. He knew her greed would become her downfall. By trying to use money to destroy Professor W, she would end up creating the very enemy who would drag her to the bottom, where humiliation and isolation would be her only companions. Not long after, the scene shifted to the male dormitory. Amid the hustle and bustle, a dark-haired girl rushed forward, and the collision was unavoidable. The impact knocked her down and scattered her books across the floor. Even feeling awkward about the situation, the hero didn't hesitate and extended his hand to help. The girl, shy and gentle, tried to refuse the help, insisting she could handle everything on her own. Lee ignored the refusal and began gathering her materials. During the task, their fingers brushed for a brief moment, enough to fill the air with shy tension and make the young man blush. He apologized for being distracted, and she, still catching her breath, explained that she had also been rushing in a hurry. That was when the realization struck the protagonist. He wasn't facing a random stranger, but Liao Keiken. In his past life, she had been a legend, the author of a phenomenal bestseller that sold millions of copies. Lee had been an open admirer of her work, which captured the soul of urban youth like no one else, going far beyond romantic cliches and delivering brilliant, deeply layered characters. Having that brilliant mind standing right in front of him was a twist he never expected. Another realization followed. Liao Keiken was in his class. The protagonist couldn't contain his excitement as he praised her work, leaving the girl completely disoriented by the sudden approach. Trying to hide the shock of being recognized before achieving fame, she attempted to make excuses, but he went straight to the point, praising the beauty of her writing and comparing her words to something that seemed to come alive on their own. The atmosphere of admiration only intensified when he mentioned seeing her awards ceremony. The precise compliment made her blush, yet secretly feel flattered. In press photos, she looked like an untouchable and elegant figure, but here in the real world, she was simple and charming. Standing face to face with his childhood idol stirred Lee's emotions. The impact was so strong that he nearly fell in love on the spot. He realized that this encounter was far from a waste of time and insisted on carrying her books. Liao tried to refuse again, assuring him she could manage, but the young man didn't back down. He explained that it wasn't a joke or cheap hidden motives. It was simply the excitement of a genuine fan who finally had the chance to stand close to someone he admired. Deep down, Li's urgency had a darker reason. In his previous life, he had witnessed the tragic end of that rising star. He remembered the news from the other timeline, where the writer died at home after battling severe depression. Back then, the public had been cruel, treating the illness as weakness or attention-seeking. Even her own parents failed to understand what was happening in their daughter's mind, and the world watched her collapse without lifting a finger. Now, with the chance to rewrite the story, the hero had no intention of letting her walk that lonely path again. At that time, common belief was harsh. Many people thought writing stories was nothing more than a hobby, and that authors didn't deserve proper pay. In the present, the writer, still far from fame, thanked the protagonist for his support. He not only helped gather her materials, but also insisted on walking her to the office, clearing the way for her. The young man quickly noticed the fragility hidden behind her talent. She was a sensitive soul, crushed by the indifference of a family that refused to value her potential. Li saw a golden opportunity. He knew she would become a literary phenomenon and decided he would change the girl's tragic destiny. To him, success didn't depend solely on luck, but on knowing how to cultivate the right resources and the right people at the exact moment. During their walk across campus, the hero used a clever strategy to build connection. He claimed she reminded him of a cousin, a prodigy who used to win writing competitions but had her career cut short by a traditional and patriarchal family. According to him, that relative had been forced to abandon her dreams to support her younger brother through an ordinary job. The story hit its target. Emotional and with tears in her eyes, the young woman confessed that she was living through the exact same situation with her own brother. Li's story became unexpected fuel. Hearing about the supposed cousin who chose to fight against injustice made the writer feel she also needed to become stronger. That encounter planted the seed of rebellion. It was time to stop hiding and turn her dream into a real business to achieve independence. Liao Kekin's past was a chain of domestic abuse. In the original timeline, Li remembered that she faced overwhelming pressure for being the eldest daughter, treated as a source of income by a family that exploited her without mercy. Opportunists surrounded the writer with fraudulent investments, and because she lacked business knowledge, she repeatedly fell into financial traps. Instead of protecting her, her parents sabotaged every chance of professional success and even accepted pitiful advance payments just to push her away. Life at home was a nightmare of constant verbal attacks. Liao's mother would scream endlessly, complaining that her daughter contributed too little, even when she handed over nearly all her earnings to support the household. The matriarch's plan to fix the family's future was grotesque. Force the young woman into marriage with a vulgar man much older than her, simply because he had the financial means to support her and an interest in students. While Liao's brother wasted what little they had, the girl remained the only pillar holding the family together, sacrificing everything for her relatives. Even though she was an honest and upright person, she was treated like property. Unable to understand what she had done to deserve such contempt, the young woman swallowed her sadness and melancholy. Suffocated by that reality, she pulled herself together as best she could and rushed out, escaping into the exhausting routine of her steady job just to avoid more conflict. By abandoning her writing, Liao cleared the path for a mediocre replacement to steal the spotlight, becoming the new award-winning literary sensation. While the so-called dark horse filled posters with success, the young woman withered in a colorless routine where every hard-earned cent was devoured by rent and her family's endless demands. The fear of facing her mother's fury for not bringing enough money home became a constant barrier that prevented her from investing in herself. The weight of physical and psychological exploitation eventually took its toll, pushing the young woman into severe depression. Even when she finally managed to publish and stabilize her income, peace didn't last long. Her family's greed was a bottomless pit. Her own father went as far as threatening her life if she refused to buy a luxury car for her younger brother. To her parents, Liao's success was nothing more than an ATM to fund gifts for their son, while she was treated as someone who didn't even deserve the basics. The writer tried several times to break free and escape that toxic environment, but a dirty move from her mother sealed her fate. In a staged scene designed for the newspapers, the woman dressed in rags and played the victim in front of a journalist, begging for help and claiming that her daughter had abandoned her to suffer alone. The lie destroyed Liao's reputation. Overnight, she went from being an exemplary daughter to an ungrateful villain in the public eye, making any attempt to live a normal life nearly impossible. The author's public image collapsed. People who once saw her as the resilient heroines from her own books showed no mercy. The court of public opinion and the relentless persecution from her family created a storm of hatred she couldn't withstand. In the end, the pressure was what broke her. If her relatives hadn't been so cruel, the outcome might have been very different. But now, the game was different. The protagonist knew the tragic future had not yet happened, and that there was still time to fix everything. With contagious confidence, he assured her that she would become a massive success and joked that he hoped she wouldn't forget him once she was rich and famous. For Liao, hearing those words from a stranger felt like a life preserver in her darkest moment. As proof of trust, the writer gave the young man her email address. Back then, with the internet still in its early days and computer access limited, she began visiting the college lab every week just to check her inbox, anxiously hoping for a message from him. That encounter left a deep mark. She returned home inspired and motivated by his encouragement, determined not to give up under social pressure. Their farewell was light and filled with gratitude. Liao, still blushing with shyness, promised to follow his advice and keep writing for her future fans. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already planning his next moves. He knew the technology and instant messaging market was about to explode and needed to align his business with a partner who lived in another city. Between strategies, he kept wondering whether the seed he had planted in the heart of the future literary legend would grow. The answer came sooner than expected. A new email notification had just arrived for the girl. The message in her inbox was from Lee. In it, he reinforced that she could not give up and had to stay focused on her goal, no matter the cost. That encouragement became the fuel the aspiring writer needed, because she had been on the verge of quitting everything. Shortly before that message, she had been crushed by a literary consultant who called her work boring, depressing, and a waste of time, suggesting she pursue a more useful profession. Those harsh words nearly shattered her confidence, but Lee's support brought a new perspective. The opinion of a bitter professional did not define the value of her work for real readers. Renewed, she promised herself she would keep pushing forward. The protagonist, eager to know if his plan was working, sent an instant message soon after, asking if she was in class. The speed of technological communication at the time left the girl stunned, since their last contact had been face-to-face. Seizing the opportunity, Liao invited him to lunch. They met near the computer lab, and she, still shy, brought a few unpublished drafts for him to review. As he read the first lines, the young man felt a chill run down his spine and began to sweat with nervousness. He recognized the material instantly. It was the beginning of dust particles in the heart. In the original timeline, that work would not even start being written until 1998. Lee was holding the manuscript that, in the future, would earn the author the most prestigious literary awards and nearly take her to the peak of global recognition. The destiny of that story was already changing right before his eyes. The future Nobel Prize winner watched Liao's hesitation. She was visibly insecure, expecting harsh criticism about her drafts. The reason for her fear was familiar. A teacher had already torn the text apart, calling it trash and suggesting she stop writing altogether. Liao confessed that even though she liked what she had created, the judgment of an authority figure made her question her own talent. The protagonist remembered reading in his past life that this was the exact moment when the author almost abandoned her career because of mediocre criticism. Calmly, he explained that art is subjective. Those who enjoy a style will devour the book, and those who don't simply won't read it. To illustrate, he cited the example of The Great Gatsby, which received mixed reviews at release and only later became an immortal classic. The impact of those words was immediate. Feeling supported, Liao begged for technical advice to improve her writing, but the young man froze for a second. He realized that if he interfered too much with the structure of the text, he might destroy the originality that would one day make the work famous. He decided not to become an intrusive literary mentor. With a smile, he brushed it off and admitted he wasn't a professional qualified to give writing lessons. Instead, he emphasized that she should ignore the outside noise and trust her own vision, because the unfinished work carried an essence that no one else could replicate. Liao laughed, assuming he was just being polite to avoid saying the text was bad, but the hero knew he was standing in front of a masterpiece that only needed courage to bloom. Liao's intuition had to be her only compass. Lee's message was crystal clear. If she believed the story was good and loved what she created, then the opinions of others were nothing more than background noise. He truly believed that even if the work broke away from rigid critical standards, it would still reach the hearts of ordinary people. After all, he himself was already a devoted fan. Those words struck Liao like sunlight breaking through a storm. In her entire life, no one had ever shown such faith in her talent. The feeling was new and comforting, standing in sharp contrast to the hostile atmosphere at home. There, her mother constantly humiliated her, claiming that writing was a waste of time and that she should focus on household chores. Her cousin was held up as the example of hard work, while her father reinforced the belief that a woman's only role was to run the stove and the washing machine. Even her younger brother joined the attack, mocking his sister's simple clothes and comparing her to other girls who dressed in more fashionable styles. Surrounded by so much family contempt, the protagonist appeared like a safe harbor, assuring her that she would adapt and that everything would work out in the end. Lee held an unshakable belief. Liao Keken was destined to shine and become a giant in the literary world. That conviction rooted itself deep in the young woman's mind, becoming the fuel she needed to keep her own light from fading. Liao, her face flushed and wearing a genuine smile, thanked him for finally being someone who believed in her potential. But the peaceful moment didn't last long. Xia Oning had been watching everything from a distance, and the poison of jealousy was already beginning to bubble. The two women noticed her presence, and the atmosphere instantly grew heavy. Lee's ex-girlfriend was consumed by irritation. She couldn't stop dwelling on the fact that he hadn't spoken to her in ages, realizing that his interest had completely vanished. To Xia's arrogant friends, Lee was nothing more than a small-town bumpkin with no value, and they couldn't accept that he had replaced a girl like her with a country girl like Liao. Xia tried to shut down the gossip, pretending she didn't care, but her reaction made it obvious she was boiling inside. The protagonist, who had been trying to enjoy his rare moment with the writer, suddenly felt blinded by anger. The two women kept staring and speaking loudly, ruining the meeting and, even worse, throwing cruel insults at Liao. While the gentle girl maintained her composure and refused to be shaken, the young man decided it was time to step in. Clearly shaken, he asked Liao for a minute and marched toward the girls. The stress was so intense that his perception of time and space seemed distorted. Xia felt both miles away and just a step in front of him. He caught the tail end of their conversation, where they were still plotting how to take advantage of the situation, and prepared himself for confrontation. The situation felt almost supernatural. The girls were dozens of meters away, yet the protagonist could hear every word as if they were standing right beside him. He realized this new world operated under different rules. His hearing had been tuned to a superhuman level, allowing him to monitor distant conversations with ease. Unsure whether it was a passive ability or something he needed to activate, he silently celebrated this gift of rebirth, though he ultimately decided it wasn't worth wasting energy confronting gossipers. Liao noticed Lee's strange behavior and tried to figure out what was going on. To avoid looking crazy, he quickly brushed it off, claiming he had simply drifted into his thoughts after spotting some acquaintances. With a light smile, he shifted the focus to their stomachs, reminding her that lunch would soon be over if they didn't hurry to the cafe. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the scene was all about big business. John Fian was leading a packed conference, delivering a masterful speech about the digital revolution. With strong conviction, he preached that the fusion between the internet and artificial intelligence would not only transform the market, but also dictate the rhythm of daily life around the globe. Watching from afar, the protagonist recognized Fian's talent. The man was a master of rhetoric, capable of selling any idea and hypnotizing a crowd. His speech was ambitious. Technological progress would tear down geographic walls and language barriers, connecting the planet in a continuous network. Lee knew he was looking at one of the architects of the future, someone who understood that information was becoming the world's new currency. The vision of a technology-driven future was seductive, but the protagonist knew there was more beneath the surface. He acknowledged Jan Fian's brilliance, yet carried the burden of knowing that in the original timeline, pressure and the path he chose would lead the businessman to a tragic and premature end. While the audience saw only progress, he saw danger lurking ahead. In the middle of the conference, the young man's analytical posture drew attention. When security guards tried to remove him, assuming he was causing some kind of disturbance, Jan Fian himself intervened. The businessman sensed that the student was not an ordinary spectator. There was a depth in Lee's gaze that intrigued him. Even as his advisors labeled the young man a fame-seeking fanatic, Fian saw a reflection of his own ambitious youth. To everyone's surprise, the magnate decided to give the stranger a chance to speak. The conversation moved closer to Fian's office, where the atmosphere turned into a subtle test. The businessman wanted to understand who this determined young man was, someone who didn't seem intimidated by his presence at all. The shock was immediate when the student, with icy calm, declared that he had been expecting this meeting. Without hesitation, Lee went straight to the strategic point. He knew Fian's plan was to integrate new technologies into China's industrial sector. He validated the idea, highlighting that China's competitive advantage would make the initial phase easier, but made it clear that the real challenge would come shortly afterward. The student's confidence unsettled the billionaire. He was no longer facing a typical student, but someone who seemed to read the future like an open book. China possessed a hidden weapon, the demographic dividend. The protagonist explained that since the population still had limited purchasing power, the ideal strategy would be to focus on affordable technology rather than luxury products. John Fion immediately realized he wasn't dealing with a book-smart student who simply memorized theory, but with someone who truly understood the real game of the market. The suggested plan was precise. Instead of burning through all available capital at once, the smarter move would be controlled investment with pricing slightly above average to maintain margins. The crucial element would be direct contact with consumers, gather rapid feedback, and adjust the product in real time. When he heard that he was on the right path to changing the world, the billionaire froze. He was used to being called crazy or overly demanding by his own partners. Receiving validation from a stranger moved him deeply. Seizing the moment, the hero played his final card. He handed over a program he had recently developed, leaving the businessman free to decide what to do with it. The message was clear. If Fion was truly seeking real opportunities, he couldn't ignore that software. No one there was trying to trick him. The goal was a partnership built on vision. Jan Fion was stunned by the level of sophistication in the gift. Suspicious, he asked whether the young man wasn't afraid of being robbed, since there was no contract or formal signature protecting the technology. With a bold smile, the student replied that a real entrepreneur didn't need deception. Besides, that was only a demonstration version. The true potential was still locked away. If Fion wanted the complete package, he would have to prove he was the right ally. Lee decided to end the meeting and turned his back on the businessman, but the man wasn't satisfied and demanded an explanation for the strange situation. Straight to the point, Jay Fion asked why he had been chosen among so many others. The answer was patriotic. The businessman had been selected because of his dedication to strengthening China. He worked for the people, and that purpose had caught the young man's attention. The entrepreneur was fascinated by the student's stance. It was impossible to fully decipher his character, which only made him more intriguing. Before leaving, the young man introduced himself as Shulai, a name that would remain etched in the businessman's memory as the turning point toward the future. The scene shifts to the office, where Shulai was analyzing the code developed by the young man. He was in shock. The structure of the program was something never seen before, a level of technical genius that even the explanatory comments couldn't fully simplify. At that moment, the businessman became certain that he had found a golden talent. Shulai couldn't hide his excitement. The system was flawless, and with that kind of reinforcement on the team, the company would become unstoppable in the market. He knew the boy was the key to overcoming any obstacle. Shortly after, the calm university atmosphere was broken. In the cafeteria, students began whispering as they recognized a familiar face from TV. The protagonist was caught off guard when he saw that Shulai was already there. The businessman wasted no time. After 3 days of an intense and exhausting search, he had finally tracked the young man down to the dining hall to question him about the development process. When confronted, the student didn't back down. With complete confidence, he advised the businessman to stay focused and not throw away the opportunity right in front of him. Shulai froze. The boy's boldness served as a wake-up call, making the businessman realize he needed far more mental clarity to handle what was coming next. Shulai got straight to the point and invited the student to build a technological empire by his side. The businessman was convinced that the young man understood the market's potential and would be the key piece in this expansion. However, the boy cut through the nonsense. He warned that Shulai didn't need polished speeches or empty promises, since that kind of talk only fooled naive people. The young man's audacity left the businessman speechless. It wasn't every day that an ordinary student challenged someone of his status with such cold confidence. Shulai realized, frustrated, that bending that kind of talent to his will would be far more difficult than he had imagined. Even coming from a humble background, the young man decided to reward the effort the man had made to find him. He opened his folder and pulled out a few documents along with a floppy disk, drawing curious looks from everyone nearby. The content was exactly what had been missing, the final version of the program. As he flipped through the documentation, Shulai was ecstatic. He saw the key to dominating the tech industry right there. If the company were a ship ready to sail, those documents were the exact map to the treasure. Maintaining an air of mystery, the student stated that an intelligent man like the businessman didn't need to ask questions about the origin of that knowledge, demanding only that he not investigate its source. The message was clear. If there was mutual trust, The hero and the influential John Filong would build an unbeatable future together. The student saw the progress of that partnership as something natural in light of the advancements he himself had provided. While the businessman stood there in a trance, envisioning a future of glory, the young man simply shrugged and wished the company success. Before turning his back and walking away, he made one final request, that Shulai use that power to strengthen the nation. The businessman remained still, feeling a satisfaction he could barely explain. Time jumped to the turn of 1998. John Fayon's company had become the talk of the town, receiving investments worth hundreds of millions. The hero and his ally watched the explosive growth of the internet, realizing that the world was changing fast. In fact, everything was happening 9 months earlier than the protagonist remembered from his past life. With fame arriving sooner, the impact would be massive. April 1999 arrived, marking the end of the academic cycle. The hero handed his diploma to Master W with his usual politeness, but the peaceful mood was suddenly shattered by a loud bang. An arrogant girl slammed her purse onto the professor's desk, furious. She accused the veteran of persecution simply because he had failed her thesis. The truth was that she had paid 2,000 yen for someone else to write the paper for her, and she refused to accept the loss. The professor, however, was not a man who could be bought. He firmly explained that although the text looked polished on the surface, it was filled with absurd technical errors. Accepting that fraud would be an insult to the students who had truly worked hard. The young woman was stunned. She couldn't believe she had paid a fortune for such mediocre material, and that, in the end, the professor's firm stance would seal her failure. The girl swallowed her pride, grabbed her belongings, and hurried out, promising to deliver a corrected version soon. Watching the scene, the protagonist advised the professor to take it easy, since that student had a reputation for being dangerous and never letting things slide when challenged. The master simply smiled and fired back, pointing out that the boy himself had already made a mistake right on the very first page of his own paper. The mood turned tense, and the young man, embarrassed, let out a nervous laugh. Realizing that the professor had sharp eyes and wouldn't let anything slip, he made up an excuse and rushed out of the room to fix the errors before things got worse, leaving the veteran laughing alone. Later, while relaxing in the park, the hero reflected on the end of college and hoped to graduate without any new problems. That was when Jan Fayon suddenly appeared, explaining that he had discovered his location through a roommate. The businessman refused to give up. He wanted the young man on his team no matter what. He bragged that the company's technology had advanced to a whole new level and that its market value was skyrocketing. The offer was tempting. If the hero accepted the position, he would become a shareholder and get rich overnight. To Jan's surprise, the invitation was rejected with a simple shake of the head. In disbelief and clearly uncomfortable with the rejection, the businessman changed his strategy and said that his new friend could ask for any favor in return for the previous help. The young man paused, thought for a moment, and made a bizarre request. He wanted nothing more than an old mansion on 99th Street to open a cafe after graduation. Jan Fion was in shock. He couldn't understand why anyone would trade a fortune and an elite position for an old property. The businessman realized he would never fully understand that student's mind. To him, the young man was a true enigma. The hero's calm reaction in the face of a fortune left Jan Fion stunned. To the businessman, the young man seemed almost divine. He had delivered crucial data that boosted the project without charging a single cent in commission. Since buying that old building was easy for someone as powerful as Fion, he closed the deal immediately. As he watched the young man walk away, Jan could only wonder about the mysteries that XIULAI was hiding. The businessman wasted no time and ordered his assistants to arrange the purchase on 99th Street and set aside 3 million yuan. He was already planning to offer the young man the director position again once the company expanded. In Jan's eyes, the hero was a modern-day hermit, someone who helped humanity without seeking glory, a type of person he never believed truly existed. The protagonist accepted a bank card as a gesture of goodwill, aware that refusing would be pointless. Meanwhile, tension filled the campus. The university scheduled the thesis defenses for June. With only 3 months left, panic began to spread. The professor tried to motivate the students, but most of them looked like a horde of zombies, exhausted from the pressure of finding a job to survive, even before receiving their diplomas. At the end of class, the discussion continued in the hallway. Friends suggested that the blonde girl try talking to the professor, but she simply shrugged. To her, the diploma was just a worthless piece of paper, and the professor's demands were pure nonsense, since no one there believed a student research paper deserved that much dedication. To the arrogant blonde, all that academic effort was a waste of time. She couldn't understand why the professor took something so trivial so seriously. A classmate immediately pushed back, explaining that the professor's strictness was meant to turn students into specialists ready for the job market, correcting every flaw so they wouldn't embarrass themselves in the future. The girl just mocked him, saying that kind of by-the-book answer was typical of a boring, overachieving student. Tension rose when one of the girls present gave the blonde a cryptic warning to be careful. The atmosphere turned suspicious, leaving the wealthy girl momentarily uneasy, though she quickly regained her composure, confident that her money made her untouchable. As the groups began to disperse after class, one of the boys approached the young heiress and asked if she wasn't afraid of being expelled and losing 4 years of study because of sheer stubbornness. The hero watched the scene in silence, realizing that time meant nothing to her since her family was swimming in money. Another student reinforced the warning. The professor was known for his unshakable principles, and many had already failed for far less. Laughing off the concern, the girl assured them that a simple thesis would not stand in her way and that she would find a way to secure her diploma without any drama. Her friends surrounded her with admiration, drawn to the shine of wealth and arrogance. That was when the protagonist decided to step in, cutting through the atmosphere of vanity. He stated that the diploma itself would change nothing, because success depended only on real competence. Without holding back, he threw the truth in her face, shouting that she was rotten on the inside, and that if she kept acting that way, her future would be exactly like her character. Money would not be her shield forever. The hero knew that her family's prestige was temporary, and that fortune could change at any moment. Without filters, he declared that she was the most ignorant person there, making it clear that the entire university had already realized it. The other students, confused by the sudden aggression from someone who had always been quiet, tried to defend her, assuming it was nothing more than bitterness from a romantic rejection. A freckled classmate stepped in to defend the girl and began mocking the protagonist's humble background. He sneered, saying that studying would never make anyone rich and that the young man's effort to change his life was pointless. Sueli herself joined in, flaunting her parents' wealth and claiming that the hero would not earn in 10 years what she already had. She told him to stay away, comparing him to a peasant who smelled like a barn. The protagonist's best friend tried to calm things down, saying it wasn't worth lowering himself to that girl's level, but the hero remained unfazed. To him, arguing with someone like her was a waste of time. In his past life, that girl had always played dirty, and in this one, he was being patient, waiting for the right moment to act. He knew that people who look for shortcuts eventually fall on their own. The plan was simple: wait for her to stumble. With a cold smile, the young man stepped closer and issued a final challenge, questioning whether she truly considered herself rich just because of her father, since on her own, she had absolutely nothing. The hero refused to be intimidated. He explained that 5 million yuan might seem like a fortune to someone from a small village, where that amount could build the biggest mansion in town, but in the real world it barely reached the limits of a city. He warned that there were people far more powerful than her father, and that she shouldn't complain if someone used the same dirty tactics she practiced to crush her. Before turning his back, he delivered a dark warning. He would patiently wait to see her hit rock bottom. Sueli was left speechless, stunned by the intensity of those words. While the heavy atmosphere lingered around her, the protagonist moved on as if nothing had happened, inviting his best friend to have ramen on him. Zhang Min, excited, praised the hero's attitude and appearance, happy to stand beside someone so confident. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a furious scream. Sueli, completely out of control, rushed from behind the protagonist to attack him. His friend panicked, but for the hero, everything seemed to move in slow motion. With quick reflexes, he dodged the clumsy strike and easily grabbed the girl's wrist. With a cold stare, he told her to control herself and stop embarrassing herself. Desperate, she attempted a sidekick, showing that she had some knowledge of martial arts, but the move was poorly calculated. The hero dodged again, and the momentum caused Sueli to lose her balance, crashing face first onto the ground. The other students watching the scene couldn't hold back their laughter, the cafeteria filled with mockery at the ridiculous spectacle. While the villain's friends rushed desperately to help her, Sueli herself remained frozen on the floor, unable to understand how she had lost control of the situation in such a humiliating way. The scene cuts to the dormitory, where John Min couldn't stop praising his friend's resilience and attitude. He was impressed by the hero's change in behavior, and even asked if he had been secretly training in martial arts, since predicting Sueli's attack seemed almost superhuman. The hero gave a vague answer, joking that he would explain everything later, but quickly shifted the focus to their empty stomachs, suggesting they go get something to eat. While John Min tried to change the subject, the protagonist drifted into his own thoughts. He remembered a strange golden light he had seen while taking a shower and how that energy seemed to glow inside his mind. Being honest with himself, he couldn't understand how his reflexes had become so sharp. To him, Sueli's movements had seemed to play out in slow motion, giving him more than enough time to react. Convinced that it wasn't just coincidence or luck, and knowing that ordinary logic couldn't explain what had happened, he decided to look for answers at the university library the next day. After hours of searching through shelves and analyzing countless volumes, the young man finally found a clue in an ancient literary work. The book described a forgotten concept called restoration. According to the text, after the re-establishment of ancestral connections between the world and the cosmos, people who possessed spiritual roots would be able to absorb life energy through meditation. This awakening would open the door to abilities beyond human understanding and new forms of sensory perception. He had just discovered the origin of his new strength. The research revealed that new horizons were emerging: spiritual cultivation. That practice allowed an individual to merge with nature itself and walk the path toward immortality. Among the many methods described, the text highlighted the way of the sword, along with techniques focused on strengthening both the body and inner energy. The foundation of everything, however, was absolute discipline and an unshakable will to evolve. Although all of that sounded like nothing more than folklore without scientific proof, the protagonist couldn't ignore his own reality. If science couldn't explain his rebirth, then maybe the legends held the answer. He accepted that he was no ordinary person and decided he would not waste this opportunity. He would become the best in the world. As night fell, the hero realized that cultivation would be his foundation. Just as a building needs solid ground to stand on, he would need patience to refine his body, his energy, and his mind. To test the theory, he went to the campus park and sat in the lotus position beneath a tree. As he controlled his breathing and cleared his mind, he felt a deep connection with every fiber of his body. The plan was set: 9 weeks of intense training to reach a new level of power. Even under the heat of 84°, he remained focused, feeling that his journey was only beginning. Despite the suffocating humidity, the hero did not waver. He had already crossed the first threshold of cultivation, and there was no turning back. The excitement of knowing he was now a true practitioner renewed his strength, and after hours of meditation, a supernatural lightness spread throughout his body. Satisfied and without any sign of fatigue or sleepiness, he planned to return the next day. But his routine would soon bring a surprise. When he returned to the spot the following morning, the young man ran into a group of elderly people who were already training there. They were impressed by his dedication, commenting that seeing someone so young working that hard was a sign of a bright future. One elderly woman, already trying to play matchmaker, asked if he wanted to train with company since her granddaughter was single. Another old man criticized his posture, saying he needed to learn from his elders. Feeling completely out of place surrounded by so many grandpas and grandmas, the protagonist made up an excuse and quickly slipped away, leaving the woman annoyed and trying to convince her granddaughter that she was still a great catch. After an intense run to blow off some stress, the young man arrived at the central square completely drenched in sweat. That was when something caught his attention: a group of women practicing folk dances to a catchy rhythm. A memory suddenly clicked in his mind. In 2 years, that type of activity would explode in popularity, becoming a favorite pastime for people seeking health and new friendships. Watching the disorganized chaos in the square, the hero saw a golden opportunity. He knew that Chinese society was aging and that the demand for social activities for seniors would become an unstoppable force. With his knowledge of the future, he realized he could step in and organize that movement, transforming what was just spontaneous fun into something much bigger. Creating sports spaces for the elderly and promoting well-being seemed like the right path. The hero was already planning his next steps to organize the routines of the seniors in the square, who credited their longevity to the constant practice of martial arts. As he observed the group, one of the veteran masters stopped and stared at him. He felt that the energy radiating from the young man was just as dense and powerful as his own. The scene cuts to the airport, where boarding for Yanu was in full swing. Among passengers organizing documents and luggage, the protagonist stood out. The latest generation cell phone in his hands gave the impression of someone influential and successful. He was on the line with John Fayon's assistant, who had already prepared a list of properties for viewing. With complete composure, the student announced that he was taking off and would only be reachable again in 3 hours. He was leaving to conquer a city he knew very well from his past life. Once in Yanu, the hero went straight to handle financial matters. At the bank, the consultant was impressed, Standing before her was a 20-year-old man with the appearance of wealth and cutting-edge technology, negotiating multi-million-dollar assets. She offered installment plans and full support for loans, trying to secure him as a VIP client. The young man thanked her for the courtesy, but remained cautious. He knew something that no one there could imagine. The value of those properties was about to skyrocket and multiply tenfold. That offer was not just advantageous, it was the first step towards securing his fortune in the region. The property choice was spot on, and the real estate agent did not disappoint. Even though the area was still under development and the real estate market was going through a rough phase, the hero did not hesitate. He pulled out a card and, to everyone's shock, announced that he would pay the full price of the property in cash. Watching a young man spend 1 million yuan without blinking left, the bank's customers stunned. The young man carried an air of modest wealth that seemed carefully calculated down to the smallest detail. In the surrounding area, the chatter was full of disbelief. Some people commented that the house was far too distant from downtown, located in a tiny, outdated neighborhood that simply wasn't worth the investment. The hero, however, ignored the skepticism around him and signed the contract. He knew his return to the past had a clear purpose. That so-called old wreck would soon become his gold mine. As he left, he bought the latest edition of a financial newspaper. The headline confirmed exactly what he had suspected. Fion Company had just received a massive investment from the Black Panthers group. Jan Filong was climbing to the top of the corporate world at an unbelievable speed, attracting foreign capital like a magnet. The protagonist smiled, fully aware that growing alone was a challenge, but the success of his allies made his plans much easier. The cold started to bite, and he decided it was time to head back. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the central office of one of the largest corporations in the region. The atmosphere was strictly formal when Mr. Liu arrived. As the chief director of technology investments in Yanjin, he wasn't there to waste time. The executive demanded immediate updates on the data USO was preparing, ordering that a full report be delivered without delay. The power game at the highest levels was only just beginning. The secretary received orders to reserve a nearby restaurant. The boss wanted to have lunch with Mr. Lin and would accept nothing less. Before leaving, she mentioned in a slightly superior tone that there was an insistent young man outside requesting an audience to discuss an urgent matter. The businessman, already exhausted from listening to proposals from dreamers who showed up every single day, refused immediately. He had no patience for yet another motivational speech about the future. However, after a brief moment of reflection, he changed his mind. He remembered his own youth and the ambition that once drove him, deciding the newcomer deserved at least a chance to speak. The assistant allowed him in, and the protagonist stepped forward. He was focused and optimistic, ready to evaluate whether that company truly had the potential to become the powerhouse it claimed to be in the new global landscape. While waiting for Mr. Liu to finish his commitments, the secretary tried to remain polite, easing the tension of the wait. Inside the office, the businessman was wrapping up a call about expanding retail chains across China. He passionately argued that the economy was taking off thanks to the internet and the market's hunger for new technologies. In his view, it was the perfect moment to grow. After rescheduling a dinner with his contact, he finally ended the call. As he stepped into the hallway, Mr. Liu came face to face with the red-haired young man waiting for him. The determination in the boy's eyes was obvious, something you didn't see in just anyone. Curious, Ludashi walked toward the hero to find out what could possibly be so important. The owner of Yankee saw no point in the visit at first, assuming the young man was there simply to beg for a job, since the company's staff was already full. But the young man broke the heavy atmosphere by standing up and clearly stating he had no interest in employment. The answer caught the businessman off guard, and now he tried to understand the real reason behind the meeting. The truth was that the 11th brother's plan to expand physical stores was a ticking time bomb. The protagonist realized that failure wouldn't come only from market fluctuations, but from a health crisis that was on the horizon. Within a few years, an epidemic would devastate any brick-and-mortar retail network. While the businessman saw Yang and Feion as capable successors, the young man saw nothing but arrogance and a lack of strategic vision in them. The visitor's silence, paired with a mysterious smile, made the executive uneasy. Lulei decided it was time to lay his cards on the table and revealed that he had spent recent months studying the country's technology and internet sectors. He got straight to the point. The idea of opening new physical stores, mentioned earlier over the phone, needed to be abandoned immediately. The businessman considered that an exaggeration, assuming the boy was simply trying to make himself look important with empty predictions. With a mocking tone, he questioned the logic behind that claim. The explanation came quickly. As infrastructure projects advanced across the country, land prices and rents would skyrocket. Keeping stores open would turn into a guaranteed loss due to rising fixed costs and expensive labor. The real solution, according to him, was the digital environment. Lee stated firmly that the future belonged to e-commerce. Faced with that cold and precise analysis, the businessman lost some of his arrogance and fell into deep thought, reconsidering everything he believed he knew about the young man standing before him. Lee noticed that Ludashi was merely playing along, not truly taking his predictions seriously. To the businessman, the idea of store failures still sounded far too superficial. He responded confidently, shaking his head and stating that although rents were high, the profits from the retail chains were more than enough to cover expenses. In Ludashi's mind, the young man had no understanding of the brand's strength, where customer lines kept growing day after day. The executive saw the young man as someone who understood paperwork and bureaucracy, but had no real grasp of business. In his opinion, success depended on seizing opportunities, and being afraid to expand was the fastest way to lose money. Even though he considered the boy naive, he still respected the boldness it took to challenge someone so influential. On the other side, Lee simply smiled in silence, knowing reality would eventually hit like a bucket of cold water, since he carried the memories of how the future would truly unfold. Betting on caution, Lee gave one final warning. The electronics sector had its own unstable logistics system, requiring extreme care. The suggestion was met with laughter. Ludashi called him crazy, but deep down he admitted that such boldness was a sign of a bright future. Without insisting further, the protagonist handed over his business card, making it clear that when things started to fall apart, he would be available to help. The young man's confidence struck Ludashi's ego. To the businessman, the idea of accepting advice from a kid was absurd, so he didn't hesitate to toss the business card straight into the trash. He was convinced he would never need that contact. However, the discomfort lingered. Something about those predictions had hit him hard. Driven by a strange gut feeling, and without fully understanding why, he eventually changed his mind, retrieved the card from the trash, and stored it carefully in a safe place. Ludashi was already planning the future of his technological empire, imagining that young man would one day witness his rise to power. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained calm, watching the sunny day with the peace of someone who already knew what tomorrow would bring. He was certain the businessman wouldn't change his plans now, but he also knew that soon reality would come knocking. The plan was simple. Wait for the moment when necessity and regret would force a reunion. The journey then continued to the city of Kandu. Back at the university dorm after a long time away, the hero barely had time to catch his breath before being greeted by an overexcited Jiang Min. His friend tried to give him a tight hug to show how much he had missed him, but was quickly pushed aside. Staying true to his straightforward nature, the protagonist simply explained his absence by saying he had gone to visit his parents for a few days, cutting the emotional reunion short. Curious, his roommate asked whether the protagonist had bragged to his parents about their friendship, even hoping he might get invited over for dinner someday. Things got awkward when the friend started acting strangely, putting on lipstick and striking dramatic poses, joking that the hero must be desperate for a little sister. With no patience for the nonsense, the young man ignored him and continued organizing his belongings. Now, the plan had shifted. With his brother's contacts out of the way, the new focus was to transfer the data to a major company. The hero could already picture profit and success knocking on his door. With the Yanju phase completed, the next step was to secure a house in Sanli. While getting settled, he casually asked whether his friend had visited his own family over the weekend, but the guy brushed it off with a forced sense of independence, claiming he didn't miss anyone and preferred to avoid relatives asking too many questions. The tone of the conversation changed when his roommate asked if he had run into any trouble or dangerous people along the way. The protagonist answered directly. He hadn't seen anyone because the area had been deserted. His friend joked that he would be there to protect him if anything went wrong, but the comment made the young man think. He began to wonder whether powerful figures, like Mr. Lon, might already be keeping an eye on him. After all, he knew that if he possessed something valuable, the real players wouldn't take long to show up. The mood shifted suddenly with the unexpected arrival of a mysterious old man who had been watching the protagonist for some time. The moment he spotted him, the hero felt a chill run down his spine, a strange and unexplainable sensation. The white-haired elder seemed relieved to have finally found him and rushed forward, grabbing his hand with forced familiarity, as if they were old friends. Without giving him a chance to refuse, the stranger dragged him to a secluded spot, insisting that he needed to show him something. Away from curious eyes, the old man decided to reveal his true power. he began performing cultivation techniques, causing his body to radiate an intense and overwhelming red flame. The magical energy was so strong that it left the young man stunned. Raising his hand toward the sky, the man pushed his energy to the limit, covering himself entirely in mystical leaves. Faced with such a bizarre and impressive display, the protagonist could only wonder what else to expect from this strange individual. Even the old man felt slightly embarrassed by the situation, sighing at the awkwardness of his performance before asking whether the young man understood the message. Observing carefully, the hero finally grasped the feeling, that inner fire transforming into pure power. At that moment, he realized he was standing in front of a true cultivator. In that world, many people sought immortality, but the young man, surprised and speechless, concluded that he shouldn't reveal his own status as a beginner in the art of cultivation. Meanwhile, the elder reflected silently on the countless people who had crossed his path throughout his long life. The old man analyzed the redhead's unique energy, imagining he would be the perfect match for his granddaughter. In his mind, the two would make an unbeatable couple. Suddenly, a strange sensation ran through Lee's body, causing him to tremble without understanding what was happening. Curious, the young man asked why he was being followed, only to be hit with a bizarre question. The old man wanted to know if he was single so he could offer him in marriage to his granddaughter. The proposal left the protagonist completely shocked. Since this was his first real encounter with another cultivator, he had expected to exchange knowledge about techniques in the cultivation world, but instead found himself trapped in a forced blind date scenario. Trying to escape the situation, he lied, claiming he already had a serious commitment and needed to rush to class, but the old man refused to accept the excuse. The elder began praising his granddaughter's qualities, insisting she was the definition of perfection and that she studied in the same group as Lee. Ignoring the young man's protests, the old man used his strength to hold him in place and loudly called out for the girl. She appeared quickly, already looking used to her grandfather's unpredictable behavior. While the protagonist watched the comedic scene in silence, the grandfather tried to hide his embarrassment with laughter, putting on a dramatic show about how much he missed his granddaughter and how he had come all the way to the university just to see her. The young woman looked visibly uncomfortable with the interruption to her day, completely unaware that the real reason for the visit was the boy her grandfather was still holding by the arm. The grandfather had arrived loaded with sweets and expensive clothes for his granddaughter to share with her classmates. Taking advantage of the distraction during the family reunion, the protagonist tried to quietly slip away so he wouldn't get in the way, but he didn't get far. The old man intercepted him in a comically desperate manner, begging for just 10 minutes of his time. The idea was simple. The young man was single, the granddaughter was single, so why not let them get to know each other before making any final decisions? That persistence began to push Lee to his limits. The elderly man swore with absolute confidence that his granddaughter was the most beautiful woman in the world and that it would be impossible for the young man not to fall for her. However, the hero had clear priorities. His full focus was on cultivation and strengthening his powers, leaving no room for romantic distractions. The tension in the air started to feel like a duel of wills between two cultivators, where one was trying to escape while the other refused to let go. The old man noticed that, beyond raw talent, the boy possessed a rare level of determination, which only increased his desire to bring him into the family. While the young man pleaded for freedom, already exhausted by the absurd situation, the gray-haired elder decided to appeal to emotions. With shining eyes, he claimed the young man should show compassion to an old man who only wanted to be happy. The performance escalated quickly. The grandfather suddenly threw himself to the ground, pretending to suffer unbearable pain and shouting that he would die of heartbreak if he were rejected. The protagonist, caught between guilt and the sheer absurdity of the scene, froze in place. At that exact moment of chaos, the granddaughter finally stepped closer and came face to face with the shocking sight of her grandfather clinging to the legs of a complete stranger. The old man instantly changed his posture, greeting his granddaughter as if he hadn't just put on a dramatic show on the ground. Lee, on the other hand, froze the moment he realized who the girl was. Sha Unan, the very person he had previously had a serious falling out with. The tension rose quickly when Zia demanded to know what her grandfather was doing with that young man, already suspicious that Lee was using her family to force some kind of romantic connection. The grandfather, amused by the situation, tried to step in, but his granddaughter wasn't interested in listening. She accused the protagonist of being a relentless pursuer who refused to take no for an answer. In her eyes, The young man who once seemed like a submissive puppy had now turned into a dangerous opportunist, willing to manipulate even an elderly man to get what he wanted. Xia confronted the hero directly, asking whether he was intimidating her grandfather and claiming that such behavior was completely unacceptable for a student. Li simply watched the scene with skepticism, noticing how close the girl was to losing control from sheer anger. The old man, trying to fix the mess, insisted that she was imagining things and that he had only lain down because he was exhausted. In the elder's mind, the only thing that mattered was that the young man had shown interest in his granddaughter, which he considered a very positive sign. While Xia positioned herself protectively in front of her grandfather, the old man suddenly turned the tables and, to her shock, ordered that she be the one to apologize to the young man. The argument only escalated when Xia Onin flatly refused to apologize, shouting that she would never lower herself in front of someone so insolent. The protagonist watched everything unfold, confused about how the situation had spiraled so far out of control. Ignoring his granddaughter's fury, the grandfather kept pushing, demanding that she apologize immediately to that fine gentleman. Feeling betrayed and humiliated by her own relative, the girl burst into tears, yelling that she would never forgive him before running off in despair. The old man tried to chase after her, but quickly gave up, letting out a nervous laugh and admitting that his granddaughter could be truly unbearable when she wanted to be. He acknowledged that there had been a massive misunderstanding between the two young people and promised he would explain everything later. Just when Li thought he was finally free to leave, the tone of the conversation suddenly shifted. The experienced cultivator revealed that he had already figured out the truth. He knew the young man was taking his first steps on the path of cultivation, and there was no point in hiding his nature anymore. To the master, the young man was like a blank canvas filled with incredible potential. He praised the purity of Li's essence and his rare talent, declaring that he was the perfect candidate for great achievements. The old man set aside the marriage talk and admitted that his true interest now was to maintain contact and form an alliance. The hero paused to think. He understood that he needed support to level up and strengthen his power. Sensing the opening, the elder smiled, satisfied that Lin was finally considering the proposal. Li knew that revealing too much about cultivation was dangerous. In the real world, vigilance was his greatest weapon. Exposing supernatural abilities to the wrong people was practically an invitation to be hunted. Xiaonin's grandfather, although impressed by the young man's potential, explained that he could not become his direct mentor because the boy needed to walk his own path in order to grow. Even so, the veteran remained optimistic. He saw in Li a future master who could one day become a vital ally to the Zan family. Before leaving, the old man played his final card to make sure the encounter would not be forgotten. He revealed that a cultivators conference would take place in the mountains later that week and extended a direct invitation. Speaking with complete honesty, he admitted that he had been stuck in the third realm for years, but mentioned his sister, one of the most powerful cultivators alive. If the hero managed to become her disciple, his growth would be unstoppable. The realization hit Li instantly. That elderly man was truly a respected master. Despite his eccentric behavior and questionable reliability, the offer itself was solid. The protagonist considered that advancing alone had its limits, and that having someone with such experience by his side would change everything. Interested in the chance to level up under the guidance of a living legend, the young man accepted the contact, stating that it would be foolish to refuse such an opportunity and assuring the elder that they would speak again soon. The old cultivator celebrated the news, confident that the hero had taken the bait and that the only thing left was to coordinate the details with Xiaonan. Time passed, and by Sunday, Xiaonan found herself reflecting on how easily her grandfather had manipulated her into giving the protagonist another chance. She still doubted that a boy from such a humble background could possess any real talent in cultivation or business, but her curiosity eventually won, and she decided to bring him along. The journey began at high speed toward an uncertain destination. As the car sped down the road, the young man stayed focused, writing notes in a small notebook. Xiaonin watched him quietly, remembering her grandfather's constant insistence that the two of them would make a perfect couple. Even though she tried to deny it, she felt that something about him had changed. He seemed more confident, more composed, and strangely more attractive. Blushing and losing her composure, the girl realized she was slowly falling into the emotional trap her grandfather had set, admitting to herself that he had truly become a better man. Unaware of the girl's internal conflict, the hero continued his notes, crossing Jian Feiyun's name off his list of pending matters. It had been over a week since the disc had been delivered to Lin Yanon, yet there had been complete silence. He began to suspect that something had gone wrong along the way, or that the company's management had intercepted the material, preventing the information from reaching its intended destination. That silence was worrying. The protagonist had invested too much time into developing that software and needed a response from John Fion to keep his plan from collapsing. If Lin Nong failed to respond, the losses would be enormous. Still, he held firmly to one belief. After his rebirth, the mistakes of the past were not allowed to repeat themselves. This time, the future would be written differently. Inside the car, Xia Yuning felt the weight of Li's presence beside her. She grew nervous, thinking she had been caught staring at him. The young man, fully absorbed in his notes, barely noticed her inner turmoil. She bit her lip, remembering how harshly she had treated him before. In the past, she rejected him because of his persistence, but now she saw him in a completely different light, especially after he stopped chasing her and began focusing on bigger goals. The fact that he had simply wished her well and moved on left her feeling confused, regretful, and strangely melancholic. The scene shifted to a dense trail deep in the middle of the forest. The trio moved forward along a path that seemed to lead nowhere, raising doubts in the young man's mind. The old man, laughing softly, explained that elite cultivators lived in lands invisible to ordinary eyes, protected by mystical barriers. The protagonist watched closely as the group passed through what looked like a distortion in the air. It was an invisible portal to normal humans, a gateway to a hidden world. The moment they crossed the spiritual boundary, the old man announced that they had arrived at their destination, revealing a completely new landscape before them. In front of them, a colossal mansion appeared, proving that the place operated outside the laws of reality. The protagonist noticed something surreal. They seemed to be standing in a domain suspended in the sky, a refuge impossible for ordinary mortals to reach. While he wondered whether he would one day own lands at that level, something about his companions caught his attention. He realized that Xiaonin's vital energy was fluctuating and seemed much weaker after the crossing. The girl, sensing the hero's fixed gaze, misunderstood everything. Thinking he was staring at her body rather than her aura, she tried to hide her energy with her hands, visibly irritated. To her, that kind of behavior was typical of an arrogant jerk. Unbothered by the drama, the young man simply commented, in a straightforward tone, that he hadn't expected her power reserves to be so low. Those words hit Xiaonin's pride like a punch. She immediately started shouting, saying he was completely clueless, and that, as students, they should focus on serving the state rather than measuring other people's strength. The grandfather, watching the argument unfold, only smiled quietly. To him, that kind of friction was the perfect spice to make sure his granddaughter wouldn't end up alone in life. The protagonist tried to explain that having little energy didn't mean mental weakness, suggesting that she might simply lack the maturity and cultivation to understand her own condition. Xiaonin just shrugged, pretending she had expected that analysis all along, while the old man remained convinced that, despite their explosive personalities, the two of them were destined for each other. The group continued walking across the luxurious property until, at last, they spotted several strange figures waiting for them up ahead. The island was packed with extraordinary people, and the sight was jaw-dropping. The hero had never imagined that so many cultivators could gather in one place, and he wondered whether the same thing happened in other cities. What caught his attention the most was the contrast. The people looked ordinary, yet they hid bizarre abilities. A mailman, for example, leaped dozens of meters into the air, leaving the protagonist stunned. He quickly started doing the math, thinking that with agility like that, the delivery guy must be making millions a year. The old man hurried the group along, saying that the visit to his sister required a short walk. Soon, they stopped in front of a building that resembled ancient Chinese architecture, complete with a luxurious swimming pool. Without any filter, the elderly man loudly announced the arrival of his granddaughter, accompanied by a young man, which left Xia Yunin deeply embarrassed. She begged her grandfather to stop with the insinuations, but the hero didn't react at all. He was too focused on understanding how those masters managed to hide their powers from human eyes. Xia noticed that the protagonist didn't seem to care about being introduced as her partner, which made her even more intrigued. But his mind was somewhere else. He believed the girl should have been clearer about the rules of that secret world, although the beauty of the place, especially the pool, made up for the lack of explanation. The sightseeing mood ended instantly when a magical portal tore through the air, firing bright blue rays straight toward Xia Yunin. From the blue light emerged a young and imposing figure, Lindsay, the leader of the place. The reception was respectful, but the hero was shocked when he discovered the relationship between them. To Xia Yunin, she was a grandmother. To the old man, she was an older sister. It was hard to process that a girl with such a youthful appearance carried decades of life behind her, yet Linwei didn't seem very patient with the visitor's lack of manners. Ignoring the awkward tension, Lindsay tapped her brother on the head and praised him, calling the man over 70 years old, Little Cowan. The bizarre nickname forced the protagonist to struggle to keep a straight face. He quickly remembered theories about cultivation. The greater the power, the more the body rejuvenates. That young woman was, in fact, a powerful master. She showed herself willing to support her brother through any obstacle in training, acting with a kindness that reflected fairness, despite the strangeness of the situation. The master then turned her attention to the young man. Studying Lee carefully, she noticed that his essence was incredibly pure, the kind of energy capable of boosting the cultivation level of her granddaughter, Xia Unin. Feeling the weight of that scrutiny, the girl hurried to explain that everything was just her grandfather's delusion and that she and Lee were merely acquaintances. Lindsay, unconvinced and speaking in an authoritative tone, questioned what a stranger was doing in her territory if he wasn't her granddaughter's boyfriend. The grandfather, sweating nervously, tried to justify himself, insisting that the young man's talent was rare and that he deserved a chance. After hearing the grandfather's defense, Lin locked her gaze on Lee. She admitted that the young man had the aura of a heavenly genius, but with a slight nod, she warned that there was no reason to rush. He still needed to pass the judgment of the entire clan. Meanwhile, Little Cowan was already acting as if the deal had been sealed, patting the hero on the shoulder and congratulating him with a wide grin. The protagonist couldn't understand the reason for such early celebration, but the old man explained the logic. If his sister hadn't thrown the boy out immediately, it meant he had already passed the first stage. Excited, the elderly man suggested that Lee stay nearby for a possible admission test, already treating the master as his future mentor. Soon, a colossal banquet began. The atmosphere was surreal. Veterans talked about how they hadn't seen each other in 200 years, while the younger ones enjoyed the gathering. Silence only fell when Linu Wai, the leader respected by everyone, took control of the table and ordered all the guests to take their seats. The master's speech was straight to the point. Everyone had 1 year to purify their energy and evolve, leaving arrogance behind in favor of real progress. Lee began to question whether the changes in the universe's energy were the result of his rebirth or simply the natural course of events. The final announcement stirred the crowd. A tournament would be held, and the winner would take home a massive reward. The previous year's prize had been a flying weapon capable of traveling 1,000 miles in a single day, and now everyone could only imagine the level of treasure that would be offered next. Rivalry exploded in the hall when a stubborn bald man shouted that his family would win the prize no matter what. On the other side, a man with braided hair mocked him, warning that the bald guy didn't stand a chance. In the middle of that clash of egos, Little Cowan simply laughed and took advantage of the moment to introduce his new disciple, Lee. The news spread quickly. Everyone whispered that if the master had personally chosen the boy, he must be a prodigy overflowing with energy. Still, since the challenge changed every year, no one dared to make a confident prediction. Anxiety hit the protagonist hard. He had never participated in anything like this before and could feel the weight of the pressure. The young man tried to back out, claiming he was just a beginner who barely knew a single basic technique, but his future mentor only laughed. She told him to relax because the event was just for fun, then revealed a detail that made his blood run cold. There would be a special test prepared exclusively for him. Hidden nearby, Xiao Nin listened to everything in fury, outraged to see Lee already treating her grandfather with the familiarity of a family member. The old man reassured the boy that the test would be simple and that he would get the hang of it quickly. Soon after, the scene shifted to the main plaza near the mansion. The hero was mesmerized by what he saw. The sky was filled with powerful figures. 3 masters flew on top of their own weapons, while another, with an exotic appearance, wielded a mystical staff. What impressed him the most was a seemingly ordinary young man who, with a single command, controlled a dragon made of pure electricity. Surrounded by warriors who commanded the forces of nature, the protagonist realized the level there was on a completely different scale. The reality check hit him instantly. He watched in disbelief as the most powerful cultivators in the place used their legendary abilities to cook. One young man manipulated mystical flames to grill what looked like a giant sausage, while another, a bit chubbier, used magic to prepare rice inside an electric pot. To Lee, it was surreal. He had always imagined that these people focused entirely on raw power, yet here, even children treated the supernatural as something ordinary. Noticing the stunned expression on the hero's face, Xiaonin approached to see whether he was disappointed by the scene. She explained that the path of cultivation was exhausting and long. According to her grandmother, gathering masters only to discuss techniques and classical calligraphy was incredibly boring. That was why, once a year, they mixed duty with pleasure, using hobbies and cooking as an excuse to relax and exchange life experiences. After all, controlling one's stomach was just as important as controlling one's energy. Trying to keep the conversation going, Xiaonin asked if he already had a plan for the competition. The warm atmosphere seemed to awaken her appetite, and she began suggesting spicy dishes. With a spark in her eyes, she enthusiastically described delicacies like shredded pepper chicken, tofu soup, and other snacks, desperately trying to see whether he understood what she was hinting at. She revealed, almost like a state secret, that her grandmother was from Sichuan and probably missed the bold, fiery flavors of her homeland. Li realized that behind all that talk about food, Xiaonin was genuinely trying to give him a valuable tip to help him win the master's favor. Touched by her concern, the hero assured her that he understood the message and would use that information to his advantage. The protagonist reflected on his hidden skills. In his previous life, he had been a true master in the kitchen, constantly fulfilling requests ranging from chicken wings to ramen, always loaded with garlic. He had mastered everything from the 8 great Chinese cuisines to refined dishes from French and Italian gastronomy. The only problem now was motivation. He had cooked so much in the past that he felt a certain laziness about putting on the apron again. Meanwhile, Linu Bei observed everything closely, tasting food from the pots while keeping an eye on his future son-in-law. He found it strange that the young man was standing there with his eyes closed, as if he didn't even know how to fry an egg. The old man started to worry, thinking he might have praised the boy too soon, but the grandmother intervened wisely. She said there was no need to rush because the true flavor of a dish required time, and young people needed to channel their energy with precision. Li finally snapped out of his thoughts. With so many options in mind, the real question was what to choose to impress them. He touched the pot with confidence and began pouring oil with smooth precision, feeling that any recipe there would be far too easy for his level. The final result quickly drew everyone's attention near the mansion. People gathered around, confused, trying to figure out what kind of exotic dish he had created. With an air of triumph, the hero finished the preparation and began serving not just a sample, but a generous portion, making it clear that the show was only beginning. The reaction from the other cooks was pure horror when they saw the mountain of food the protagonist had prepared. To the veteran chefs, the excessive quantity was a sign of amateurism, and the leader of the group didn't bother hiding his contempt, staring at the hero with arrogance. Among the crowd, rumors spread that the young man was trying to cheat or compensate for a lack of technique with sheer volume, since methods that unusual rarely ended well. The hero, however, refused to be shaken by the criticism. He responded calmly, stating that the final judgment would belong to whoever tasted the dish, and if the flavor wasn't good enough, he would simply cook everything again. That unshakable confidence only irritated the head chef even more. The audience continued to doubt him, convinced that such expensive ingredients couldn't possibly have been used properly in a dish prepared so quickly. Feeling the weight of the insults and the noise around him, Li began to grow uncomfortable. Lin Sugai watched the commotion from a distance, shocked by the pressure placed on the boy, yet she noticed he was still struggling to keep his composure. Little Cowan, realizing the atmosphere was getting tense, stepped in quietly. With a simple gesture of approval, he signaled to the protagonist that he trusted his work. That small gesture was exactly the relief the hero needed to regain his focus. Meanwhile, the gray-haired master reminded himself that the young man had to stay calm above all else, ready to step in if things got out of control. The moment of truth finally arrived. The tasting was announced, and a group of young women stepped forward to begin evaluating the dishes. To start the evaluation, small samples were taken from that mountain of food and handed to the judges. The first evaluator, after tasting just one bite, fell into pure delight at the flavor. Right behind her, 2 brothers couldn't contain their emotions and began to cry, claiming they had never eaten anything so perfect. The protagonist watched the scene calmly, fully aware that the real challenge would be the leader's verdict. Linu approached the table, surrounded by everyone's expectations, and was invited by the other girls to begin the tasting. The first dish was a fish soup that exceeded all her expectations with the very first spoonful. Next came a spicy red pepper fish head. The flawless presentation and refined taste left the master visibly impressed, to the point that she blushed from the intensity of the seasoning. The parade of delicacies continued until the 10th dish, a rare mawan that sparked everyone's curiosity. No one could understand how a young man like Lee knew such specific and complex recipes from traditional cuisine. But the masterstroke came with the 12th dish, the famous mapo tofu. The moment she saw the steaming tofu, Lin Bei felt her heart race, because that had been her favorite childhood dish. Using her chopsticks, she picked up a delicate piece and brought it to her mouth. The impact was immediate. Her taste buds were overwhelmed by the perfect balance between spice and the silky texture of the tofu. The master felt an intense wave of pleasure, almost losing her breath in the face of that explosion of flavors that seemed to thank the hero for every ingredient he had used. She fell into a brief trance. The taste carried her far away, and it took a few seconds before she could catch her breath and speak again. Deeply impressed, she asked the young man about the secret behind that recipe. With complete confidence, he explained that the main ingredient was dedication, recalling how he had always put his heart into cooking in the past to please the people he cared about, acting with total loyalty to deliver the best possible result. Meanwhile, the crowd misinterpreted the master's silence. The other competitors were already celebrating, convinced that the hero would be disqualified for some major mistake. Their confidence was sky high, certain that victory would belong to Victoria. But the atmosphere shifted dramatically when Lin Wei ordered the prizes to be brought forward. A mystical weapon and a secret manual. Outrage broke out instantly. The other chefs refused to accept that the result had been announced before every dish was fully tested, feeling the evaluation had not been fair. That was when one of the clan's oldest cooks, with 6 decades of experience in nutrition, stepped forward. Even as an authority in the field, she openly recognized the young man's superiority. While the veterans had focused on delivering only a single dish, the protagonist had been fast and skilled enough to prepare 10 different meals with flawless quality. The turnaround was so humiliating for the veterans that one of the oldest chefs dropped to his knees right there, begging to become the hero's disciple. Lee was stunned by the exaggerated reaction. He had only wanted to impress the master, yet he ended up earning the respect and envy of everyone present. With the competition over and night falling over the mansion, a heavy sense of defeat lingered among the losers. Meanwhile, Lin Bei, completely won over by the young man's talent, ignored protocol and asked him to stay in the kitchen to prepare a few more dishes just for her. Lee's talent in the kitchen was truly on another level. No one there could match that flavor. As she enjoyed the food, the master made a sudden decision and announced that from that moment on, he was officially her new disciple. The young man froze, expecting some complex ritual or a grand religious ceremony, but everything happened quickly and without any unnecessary formalities. Noticing his stunned expression, the leader asked whether he thought joining her group was too easy. Slightly embarrassed, he admitted that he had expected something more difficult. She simply laughed, reminding him that they were living in the 21st century and that it made no sense to cling to outdated traditions that only slowed people down. Before dismissing him, Lindsay laid out the path clearly. He needed to focus on constant self-improvement, and if any technical questions came up, little Cowan would be there to provide guidance. The new rule was straightforward. Lee would have to check in at Engine every week to train and rest, following a schedule that she herself would send. There was even an order for her granddaughter. With a knowing smile, the master announced that Xiaonin would stay there with her, because she had finally discovered how to unlock the girl's cultivation potential. Even though she felt deeply embarrassed, the young woman accepted her grandmother's command. Hours later, late at night in the park, the tension between the two students still lingered. Xiaonin felt that the hero kept looking at her and confronted him immediately. Caught off guard, he tried to brush it off, claiming he was simply lost in thought. Internally, he decided he needed to be more patient with her, recognizing that their previous encounters had not gone very well. After the chaos of the previous day, Lee picked up his pace, unwilling to waste time, but the girl stopped again, shouting that he was just taking advantage of the situation. The mood wasn't great, yet life moved on. The next morning, the scene shifted to the university. Professor W was deeply impressed with Lee's thesis, praising its structure and data analysis, stating that the work was outstanding. Even happy with the praise, the young man remained humble, while the master pointed out that there were still a few problematic issues to discuss. In the middle of the conversation, a woman in a suit interrupted the mood, bringing bureaucratic instructions and suggesting that the professor head to the academic office. The talk ended with a promise to continue the next day, but Lee felt something strange in the air. He realized the professor was walking into a trap, and that woman could be the same one who, in his past life, caused Wao Kang's downfall through slander. When crossing paths with the stranger, the hero ignored her presence, acting completely cold. Behind the scenes, the blonde woman spewed venom, complaining about the old professor and suggesting he would face consequences if he kept standing in her way. What she didn't expect was that Lee was so close and had heard every word of her threat. To the protagonist, seeing that woman trying to intimidate the professor was just another sign of her mediocrity. Later, in the dormitory, the mood was lighter. Zan Min, anxious, asked if his friend's diploma was already secured. Lee, with his usual serious demeanor, said things were moving in the right direction, but he also took the chance to give his partner a quick scolding. Laughing at the situation, he advised his friend to stop procrastinating and focus on his own diploma, since the poor guy was in complete despair for still not finishing the course. Even in the mud, the friend didn't stress about it. He simply threw himself onto the bed to take a nap. Meanwhile, Lee stared out the window, fully aware that the professor was about to fall into an ambush. He knew he had to act fast and put his plan into motion before the worst could happen. With the evidence he had been gathering for a long time in his hands, the hero prepared for checkmate. Inside the coordination office, the atmosphere turned heavy. The professor realized too late that he had fallen into a trap set by the student. The girl put on quite a performance, pretending to feel sick and crying to gain sympathy from the academic representative. The accusation was serious. She claimed the master was using his position to force a relationship with her. The professor exploded with outrage, shouting that it was a ridiculous slander. He defended his honor, reminding everyone that his years of service and spotless character should matter more than lies. The con artist didn't back down and claimed he was preventing her from defending her thesis as a form of punishment. Getting straight to the point, the master fired back. The thesis was full of serious mistakes and, even worse, it hadn't been written by her. It was clear academic fraud. Desperate after being exposed, the girl resorted to extreme victimhood, screaming that he only wanted to take advantage of her innocence. She made a dramatic scene about how her graduation and scholarship were at risk, manipulating the committee. Her plan worked. Seeing the young woman's sincere tears, the representatives began to turn against the professor, fully believing the farce. The girl's flawless appearance and bright future prospects became the perfect alibi. In the committee's eyes, someone like her would have no reason to invent a lie that could destroy the professor's career. Trembling with rage, the master demanded that Zan Sueli stop the act, but she, wiping away fake tears, appealed to the university leaders. She placed herself in the role of a helpless victim, claiming she shouldn't be forced to present evidence against such a powerful man. The professor shouted that his honor was being thrown in the trash, but the manipulator was smarter. She argued that a simple student would never have a voice against a veteran with decades of experience, twisting the image of the honest professional he had built. Cornered, the master mentioned his family and values, but Sueli fired back with a heavy lie. She claimed he had lured her into his office and locked the door with ulterior motives. The villain questioned the committee, saying her own beauty and trauma were proof enough. She quickly changed her tone, stopping her crying to call the old man a fool and hint that many other students had suffered the same fate under the disguise of his high-class pass rates. The institution's decision was a heavy blow. To calm tensions, the staff member ordered the professor to be suspended from teaching until the investigation was complete. The result was devastating for the master, who saw his passion for teaching being ripped away by a lie. Meanwhile, the hero watched everything from a distance, aware that his revenge against the corrupt system was just beginning, especially since Zan Min was also secretly listening to every detail of that conversation. Zan Sueli's scheme began to fall apart. The committee and the professor sensed something was off, and the news that she was trying to destroy the master's career spread quickly. In the dormitory, the hero received an alert from his friend about the defamation against Professor Gui. With a cold smile, Lee warned that payback would come before sunrise. He already had the entire dossier ready. At midnight, the duo took action. Dressed in black and moving through the shadows like ninjas, they spread compromising photos all across campus. The material left no doubt. The images showed Zan Sueli in intimate moments with the bald man and other guys, exposing the facade of the innocent victim she had been maintaining. The next morning, the villain woke up with no idea about the disaster. Noticing the strange atmosphere and the panic in her friend's eyes inside the room, she tried to understand what was going on. When they finally showed her the records of her hugging her lovers, the ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Panic took over when she discovered the entire campus was plastered with her secret life. Consumed by rage and trembling with fear, Sueli tore the photos apart, realizing that her academic reputation had just been buried. Used to always coming out on top, the spoiled rich girl felt the weight of being humiliated for the first time and swore revenge against whoever exposed her. Meanwhile, the buzz in the hallways only kept growing, with more and more students witnessing the collapse of the lie. Zhang Sueli's downfall was brutal, She desperately tried to hide the images to cover up the kind of people she had been associating with, but the damage was already done. In the hallways, rumors ran wild. While some suggested she was living a double life for money, others pointed out her family's fortune, which only made the situation even more bizarre. When the rich girl tried to give orders and silence her classmates, nobody paid attention. On the contrary, the laughter only grew louder. To the students, she was nothing more than a hypocrite with no authority over anyone. The hero watched the spectacle from the sidelines. He knew Sueli had never cared about the pain she caused others, but now she was finally feeling what it was like to have her life turned upside down. To him, that scandal was just the beginning, the first step in a bigger plan to erase her influence for good. The objective was clear: the total destruction of the villain's image. The scene shifted to a cafe, where Jae-Fion met with the protagonist. The businessman was thrilled, calling the plan brilliant. He could barely contain his excitement to implement new technologies and close the security gaps at Fion Company. Although he was frustrated about not having Lee working full-time at his company, something he considered a huge loss. The man listened carefully when the young hero revealed that the previous project had only been a warm-up. The current plan focused on commerce and promised to be deadly. Realizing the young man was dead serious, Jan Fion noticed that he had a well-structured long-term strategy. That was when the hero laid his cards on the table with a bold request. He wanted the businessman to acquire Zanan Company. The request caught the businessman off guard, leaving him visibly uncomfortable. The hero wasn't bluffing. He needed that move to clear the professor's name and bring down the network of influence protecting the villain. The goal was to expose Zan Sueli's corruption and make all her investors sink along with her. Jan Fion stood up, looking furious at first glance, but soon his anger turned into respect. He realized there was a rare sense of honor in that plan. The young man wasn't just looking for a fight, he was seeking justice. The businessman agreed. It was time to cut off that family's financial oxygen. Back at the dormitory, Zan Min celebrated the success of the first phase. For him, seeing the arrogant girl exposed was already a reward, but he had no idea his friend was preparing something much bigger. Despite the small victory, the mood was still heavy because Professor Gu remained suspended and under investigation. Lee's friend noticed the teacher's sadness and grew worried, but the protagonist simply said he needed to step out for a while. Lee found the professor isolated near the university lake, lost in thought and crushed by injustice. With a calm smile, the young man approached and assured him that the truth would come out faster than he expected. The master, however, was skeptical. He understood the power of those attacking him and feared for the future of his brightest student. He felt the hypocrisy of the academic world firsthand, where those who once treated him with respect were now pretending he didn't even exist. Professor W's isolation was complete. In the hallways, the looks were filled with judgment. Everyone assumed he was guilty in the scandal involving the student. Even his colleagues had already given up, warning that the battle was lost since the university's top leadership was backing the Zhang family. Meanwhile, Zan Sueli and her father were furious. To them, the university was nothing more than a backyard they could control with money. The order was clear and ruthless. The professor had to accept the blame and resign immediately. If he refused, the Zhang family would use all their influence to destroy his reputation permanently, making sure he would never find a job anywhere again. To the wealthy elite, everything had a price, and the teacher's career was cheap. Hearing those threats pushed the professor to the edge of despair. He was innocent, but he felt trapped in a system where money ruled everything. Lee, watching the teacher, understood exactly how the game worked. The Zhang family used capital to crush people, so the only solution was to strike back with even greater financial power. The professor, however, saw the young man's plan as naive. In his mind, two academics without resources could never defeat giants. Looking up at the sky, the master lamented the absence of divine justice and delivered what he believed to be his final piece of advice to his student. He told Lee to be careful and use his extraordinary talent to avoid trouble, using his own tragedy as an example of what happens when you cross powerful people. But the hero refused to accept defeatism. He reminded the professor of the lessons in resilience he had learned in class and assured him, with an enigmatic smile, that the bill would come due. No one would escape the justice he was already orchestrating. The message was clear. The master should not give up, because the counterattack was just beginning. The professor, renewed by a thread of hope, decided to wait and trust his student's strategy. The next day, the routine in the first academic building seemed normal, but the tension was unmistakable. Zan Sueli strutted through the hallways humming, acting as if she hadn't just destroyed someone's reputation. Lee intercepted her, and without hesitation, demanded that she withdraw the complaint against the professor. The villain didn't even bother pretending to feel remorse. In a mocking tone, she warned the hero not to get involved in matters that didn't concern him if he wanted a future career. Lee, maintaining his composure, delivered a verbal checkmate. He told her that this was the last chance she would have to end the conflict peacefully. Sueli simply laughed, humiliating him by saying he was a nobody at the bottom of the social pyramid and that people like him existed only to serve as stepping stones for the rich. Before turning his back, the protagonist left a dark warning. The countdown to her downfall had already begun. Meanwhile, at the Zhang family mansion, the atmosphere was celebratory. Sueli arrived home in high spirits, and her father was even more excited. He revealed that the family's fortune was about to change dramatically. The powerful Fion company had shown interest in forming a partnership. The plan was to take out a multi-million-dollar bank loan to expand their business and ride the wave of prestige from the industry giant, which had already attracted massive investments since its launch. Radiant with the possibility of becoming even more influential, Sueli's father revealed that he had received a personal invitation from Fion's top executives. Without wasting time and blinded by greed, the girl immediately began making plans to take advantage of this new phase of power. Never imagining she was walking straight into the trap that Lee and Jan Fion had carefully prepared. Comparing Fion Company's fortune to Lee's threats, the spoiled heiress could only laugh. To her, it was pathetic for a country bumpkin to give her an ultimatum while she was about to climb to a higher financial level. Sueli's father was already dreaming about the extra zeros that would soon be added to his bank account, while his daughter pictured herself attending the most exclusive circles of high society. She assured her father she would not fail in the new partnership, sealing the family's fate with false promises of dedication. The next day, during class, Sueli tried to provoke the hero by throwing a small paper ball at him. With absurd reflexes, Lee caught the paper in midair and tossed it straight back into her face. Without saying much, he began a countdown out loud. The girl, confused and irritated, had no idea what it meant until the young man's mental timer reached 0. At that exact second, Sueli's phone rang. It was her father, completely desperate, informing her that the family had lost everything. They were bankrupt, and she had nowhere left to go. Lee's plan had been executed with surgical precision. In shock, the girl lunged at him, demanding to know what he had done, but the young man simply mocked her, repeating her own words about how the Zan family was too big and powerful to ever be harmed by someone like him. The situation got even worse when creditors began calling her phone non-stop, demanding payment and sarcastically suggesting that since she loved showing off her beauty so much, she should start working to pay her father's debts. Panic took over completely. The phone slipped from Sueli's hands, and her legs gave out beneath her, collapsed on the classroom floor. In front of everyone she used to humiliate, the former heiress could only mumble that this couldn't be happening. The hero watched the scene with cold disdain, concluding that money is the most fragile foundation there is. Without it, Sueli had nothing left to support her. He left her lying on the floor with one final bitter piece of advice. She should use the time she had left to reflect on her life. As night fell, Sueli dragged herself back to the family mansion. The scene looked like a battlefield, walls covered in graffiti, and an angry crowd surrounding the entrance. She waited for the commotion to die down before slipping inside, but what she found was emptiness. The house had been vandalized and abandoned. In panic, she ran to her bedroom, hoping to save her jewelry and secure some kind of survival, but the closets had been wiped clean. Not a single valuable item remained. Everything that symbolized her status had been taken. Collapsed on the cold floor, reality finally hit her. She was broke. The same girl who once flaunted wealth now understood that in the food chain of power, there is always a bigger predator, and Lee had proven himself to be the one at the very top. The most ironic part was that the only person with enough influence to save her from total ruin at Xylon Company was the very man she had humiliated, but her pride still kept her from accepting that truth. Desperate, she tried calling her parents over and over again, but the silence on the other end of the line was terrifying. The fear that creditors might have acted with the same cruelty she had seen in movies began to torture her mind. With little money in her pocket and no idea where her family was, Sueli realized her life of luxury had an expiration date of only 1 month. That was when a loud noise suddenly interrupted her thoughts. The crash at the entrance made Sueli's heart race. Someone was kicking the door with brutal force, trying to break in. After just a few blows, the barrier gave way. The intruder was a large, muscular man who barely needed any effort to smash the entrance open. Another man, standing outside as a lookout, confirmed that the girl was hiding inside. The thugs entered the bedroom laughing, amused by her desperation, and got straight to the point. They wanted payment for astronomical debts. Sueli tried to swallow her tears, feeling the walls closing in around her. As the bedroom door took its final hits, she screamed that she didn't have a single cent and that they should go after her parents instead. But the criminal's logic was cold. The father's debt had now become the daughter's burden. Without hesitation, one of them grabbed the young woman by the neck and threw her to the ground, ordering the others to hold her down to prevent any attempt to escape. Sobbing uncontrollably, she insisted on her innocence and poverty, but the lie collapsed when one of the villains found her pink wallet hidden nearby. The moment they realized she was lying, the thug's patience ran out. When she tried to protect the little money she had left, the cash that was supposed to last the month, she received a violent punch to the face. The gang leader checked the amount and burst into mocking laughter. The few hundred yuan bills were nothing compared to the debt she owed. The criminal announced that since there was no money, the payment would be made another way. Cornered, she made one last desperate move. She claimed that if they released her, she would get the money from her parents. After all, as their only daughter, they would never refuse to help her. The response came in the form of a cruel laugh. The thug told her the harsh truth. Her parents had already skipped town a long time ago and wanted nothing to do with her anymore. In that instant, Sueli's world collapsed. She realized her father's warnings had not been empty threats. In less than 24 hours, her peaceful routine had been replaced by a living nightmare in the hands of men who didn't know the meaning of mercy. Even with the screams and desperate pleas for help, the brutes didn't loosen their grip. The situation only changed when a man in a suit stepped into the scene, giving a direct order for them to release the girl. For a brief second, hope flashed in Sueli's eyes, but the illusion didn't last long. The thug's tone shifted to something purely businesslike. He told the suited man to inform the boss that they had secured a high-value asset. Panic came rushing back full force. Sueli screamed until her lungs burned, trying to convince the gang that she wasn't responsible for her parents' debts and had no way to pay anything. It was useless. To those men, she wasn't a person, just an asset meant to cover their losses. The man in the suit dragged Sueli toward the leader, silencing her screams with a brutal strike. Grabbing her harshly by the hair, he demanded silence, while the rest of the gang laughed and enjoyed the student's humiliation. The criminals tried to persuade her that cooperating was the fastest way to end her suffering. Meanwhile, the protagonist watched the scene from nearby, staying hidden in the shadows. Even dazed from the pain of the beatings, Sueli noticed his presence. Reality hit her hard. The words that only he could rescue her were true. In a moment of pure desperation, she shouted his name, begging for intervention. Managing to get a brief opening, she threw herself at her classmate's feet. On her knees and terrified by the threat of being sold by the criminals, she clung to his legs, insisting that he was her only hope. The young man stared at her with a look of cold contempt, testing how far her regret truly went before deciding to act. With chilling composure, he pulled out a recorder. The plan was simple. Document the truth about the scheme they had set up against Professor W under pressure. The girl finally started talking. She admitted that the plan was to defame the teacher to force his resignation and secure the diploma he had refused to grant her, acting purely out of selfish interest. Between sobs, she swore she never intended to cause such massive harm, still clinging to the role of victim while begging for protection. Unshaken, the protagonist delivered the final question, demanding absolute confirmation of the professor's innocence before dealing with the gang leader, who was already approaching. Overwhelmed by fear, the assistant finally confessed everything. The professor was innocent, and the entire accusation had been a lie orchestrated by her. For the protagonist, that was the missing piece proving the teacher had been telling the truth all along. As the criminals moved closer, puzzled by the young man's calm reaction, the girl shrank back, placing her last hope for survival in Shulai. Through tears, she admitted the professor never deserved that setup. The student confessed that she had lured him into an ambush and now recognized her fatal mistake. Locking eyes with her, the young man demanded the raw truth. Desperate, she shouted that the lie was her fault and that her current suffering was the punishment she deserved. In a last attempt at redemption, she promised to do anything to restore the professor's honor, if he would just get her out of there. With the confession recorded, the hero switched off the device. The evidence was secured. With icy calm, he offered a sarcastic apology, remarking that those criminals wouldn't show her the same patience he had. He reminded her that in the past, she had shown no mercy, and now the tables had turned. The gang burst into laughter, mocking the situation. To them, a woman without integrity like her didn't deserve help from anyone. The protagonist, focused solely on restoring his family's dignity, turned his back on the chaos. Before leaving, he threw out one last jab, mocking her arrogance about wealth and power. Humiliated and defeated, the girl realized, far too late, that he had been right all along. Even resigned to the fate of being sold, the villain made one last threat. She shouted that Shulai wouldn't get away with it because no one would believe her word anyway, and the professor's reputation was already ruined beyond repair. Hearing the mockery from the loser, the protagonist suddenly stopped walking. In a cold voice, he fired back that people like her never change. If she had shown even the smallest bit of decency, she would have realized he truly had the power and money to save her. The verdict was merciless. She had failed the final test, and he wouldn't lift a finger to help. The gang leader, amused by the dramatic scene, ordered them to release the girl for a moment. With sarcasm, he suggested that since the boy was so wealthy, maybe he should show a little mercy. Interested in settling the matter once and for all, the young man asked for the exact amount of the family's debt. The criminals laughed, showing a receipt and claiming it was a small sum, 1 million yen. Without hesitation, he pulled out a check to see if that amount would be enough to end the issue once and for all. The receipt revealed an astronomical figure, 20 million yuan. The shock froze Sueli in place, and in a reflex of pure desperation, she lunged toward the young man, reaching out as if her life depended on touching him. Her arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by total humiliation, as she begged for help with the last strength she had left. The protagonist, however, didn't make things easy. He made it clear that she wasn't worthy of that money. The moment she tried to reach him, he pulled his hand away abruptly, causing the girl to lose her balance and crash hard onto the pavement. The impact was sharp and violent, leaving her motionless on the ground. He had the resources needed to pay off her family's debts, but the opportunity had been thrown away by Sueli's own foolishness. As she cried uncontrollably, the young man revealed another piece of the chessboard. He mentioned Fion Company and the medical support that could have been offered to her family. The realization hit Sueli like a devastating blow. She had always seen him as a poor, insignificant country boy, and discovering that the village kid possessed the financial power capable of saving her became her worst nightmare. The hero turned his back, making it clear to the criminals that he had no connection to that girl's problems. The next day, the truth exploded across the university. The recording spread quickly, revealing that Sueli alone was responsible for the slander against Professor W. The teacher's innocence was restored, and the unjust suspension became an obvious mistake in the eyes of all the students. Justice, though delayed and difficult to hear at first, finally prevailed thanks to the undeniable evidence presented to the committee. The head of the committee had no doubts. Sueli's career was finished. It became clear that the professor had been the victim of a cowardly setup, and reinstating him to his position was simply a matter of justice. Shocked by the cruelty of the student's scheme, the university administration decided to tighten regulations to ensure that this kind of dirty game would never happen again within the institution. Sueli's disappearance became the main topic across campus. Rumors claimed she had dropped out after her family's financial collapse. Some people swore they had seen a girl who looked just like her working at a nightclub, though the woman denied being who everyone thought she was. Meanwhile, Jean Min, the protagonist's best friend, tried to piece together the mystery of who the mysterious Good Samaritan was, the one who recorded the confession and saved the teacher. The hero even admitted to his friend that he was the one behind the recording, but Jean Min burst into laughter, not believing a single word. To him, it was impossible that someone from a supposedly wealthy family, yet always walking around with empty pockets, could have that level of influence. In a joking tone, Min assured him that if things ever got tough, he would always have a plate of food waiting at his table. Ignoring the teasing, the redhead cut the conversation short and dragged the protagonist outside, satisfied that Professor W's name had been cleared. Not long after, at the university cafeteria, daily life began returning to normal. While deciding what to eat, with the protagonist choosing only a light soup, they spotted Xiao Ning walking through the place. She looked out of place, searching for somewhere to sit, her expression showing that the day had not been easy for her. The question about who made the recording still lingered in the air, and Shulai's silence as he sipped his soup served as a quiet confirmation for Xiaoning. She wasn't naive. Even with the voice altered, she could recognize his tone anywhere. With a playful smile, he asked why she was so curious, since she seemed to already know the answer. Despite everything, Xiaoning felt a heavy weight in her heart over her former classmate. To her, even though Sueli had tried to destroy Professor W, the punishment seemed far too harsh. The protagonist responded bluntly. The creditors had taken the girl, and he would not lift a finger to pull her out of that trap. He emphasized that he acted for the professor, because if it hadn't been for him, no one else would have delivered justice for a man who had always been honorable. Xiaoning didn't hide her frustration, shouting that Sueli's fate was now a complete mystery and that terrible things could happen to her. Xulai remained cold. In his view, some people simply weren't worth the effort of being rescued. As the argument heated up, John Min approached the table, confused by the tense atmosphere and the girl's explosive reaction, as if a simple greeting had suddenly turned into an insult. Trying to lighten the mood, the hero casually remarked that his sense of justice was sharper than most people's. John Min, laughing at the situation, showed up with coffees he had paid for out of his own pocket, brushing off any thanks. Xiu Lai, with a teasing grin, joked that his friend was like a son to him. The joke didn't land well with Min, who fired back immediately, calling the protagonist a kid and ending the exchange with playful insults. The atmosphere at the university finally changed. The professor, overflowing with gratitude, confessed to Xiu Lai that during his darkest moments he had nearly lost the will to live. The young man, always perceptive, had been the anchor that kept him from giving up. To the gray-haired teacher, the student had been the only ray of hope in the middle of chaos, proving that justice could still exist without demanding anything in return. Between heartfelt thanks, the professor reminded him that they still needed to finalize the last details of the diploma after the class period ended. Meanwhile, near Liao's residence, the atmosphere was different. The young woman met the protagonist to share a personal achievement. After months of dedication, her work had finally been published, and the publisher had sent the first printed copies. As a gesture of appreciation to her greatest supporter, she made sure to hand him a book personally. Xiu Lai, acting like an excited fan, asked for an autograph, joking that he would proudly display the book once she became a literary celebrity. Despite the success, something felt off. Even with collaboration offers from influential figures like Zhang Feilong, Liao seemed distant and cold. Xiu Lai noticed the shift in her behavior and insisted that she open up. After all, it wasn't normal for a rising writer to carry such a heavy expression. Under pressure, she finally revealed the source of her concern. Her mother and brother would be visiting the following week. The bigger problem was her brother. According to their parents, he was a troublesome figure and extremely provincial. Claiming they were too busy, the parents had pushed the responsibility of taking care of him onto her shoulders, turning what should have been a moment of celebration into a family headache.